Hello everyone, I know you watched this video to accompany you to sleep. So if you like this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, don't forget to tell me where you are from and what time you watched this video. Let's jump straight into the story. On the afternoon of April 11th, 2007 in Utah, USA, a 51-year-old father named Martin McNeil took his youngest daughter, Ada McNeil, home and then went to the kitchen to prepare lunch. Meanwhile, Ada searched the house for her mother. Her mother, Michelle McNeil, had promised to pick her up from school, but her father came instead. The little girl wanted to ask her mother why she didn't come. Soon after, Ada discovered her mother in the bathroom. She was lying half in the bathtub, with her head submerged. The water had a strange reddish-brown color, her black hair floating on the surface with the ends gathered around the drain. Ada was only 6 years old, so she couldn't comprehend this horrifying scene. She tried to wake her mother up, but sadly, her mother would never hear her again. So what happened that year? Let's travel back in time on 2007. Our main character, Michelle, was born and raised in a wealthy family in Concord, California. Her talents weren't limited to playing the violin skillfully. She was also the cheerleading captain and homecoming queen. With her striking beauty, outstanding talents, and excellent education, quickly became the idol of many young men, admired but seemingly unattainable. When Michelle was 20, at a party for single Mormons, she met Martin. Martin's attractive appearance and sophisticated demeanor made Michelle's heart flutter intensely. Like a young girl in love, she was ready to risk everything for her love. Just a few months later, despite strong opposition from her family, Michelle daringly eloped with Martin. Their whirlwind romance quickly ended in marriage, when they had known each other for less than a year. After marriage, within 5 years, Michelle gave birth to 4 children for Martin, including 1 son and 3 daughters. But it seemed that Martin still felt 4 children weren't enough, so they adopted 4 more daughters from Ukraine. The burden of a family of 10 didn't seem to be an issue for them, as Michelle was truly wealthy. Moreover, Martin was a doctor with both reputation and money. The whole family lived a peaceful life, enjoying warmth and happiness every day. These seemingly perfect and warm days lasted for decades. However, throughout this time, Martin seemed to always be hiding some secrets. Whether it was due to getting used to married life and losing interest, or because Martin had changed. He no longer seemed to value the wife who had been by his side for nearly 30 years. From age 20 to over 50, the ravages of time are more apparent in women. Michelle had long lost the confidence of her youth. She gradually realized that the man she had once blindly pursued no longer loved her as before. Since then, Michelle also became increasingly dejected and sad. Depression and anxiety followed, and it seemed she wasn't the only one who was ill. On February 4th, 2007, Martin announced to everyone that he had cancer and other illnesses, and only had a few months left to live. Everyone believed him. More than a month later, Martin's condition seemed to worsen as he began using a cane to walk. Perhaps he wanted to see his wife's youthful beauty one last time before he died, so he suggested Michelle get a facelift. Michelle always listened to her husband, but this time she felt very hesitant. On one hand, she worried about her high blood pressure and psychological issues potentially risking the surgery. On the other hand, she wanted to renew herself to win back her husband's heart. Michelle thought back and forth and finally came up with a solution. She told her husband that she could have the surgery, but needed to wait for her blood pressure to decrease. She wanted to use this time to lose weight, so the surgery would be safer. However, she didn't expect that her husband's request for her to get a facelift wasn't a discussion, but an announcement. He had already arranged the surgery and shouted, "The money has been paid. The surgery can't be postponed. Are you going to do it or not?" Michelle had to obediently comply. On April 1st, this was the final consultation before surgery with the plastic surgeon. Noticing Michelle was still hesitant, but seemingly afraid of something, she couldn't postpone the surgery. After this consultation, Martin requested quite a few prescriptions from the doctor. On April 3rd, Michelle was taken into the operating room. Like her escape 30 years ago, she believed this man would bring her happiness. She believed that after the surgery, this man would love her as before. As the anesthesia needle pierced her skin, she gradually fell asleep. This surgery lasted from 8 a.m. until 3 p.m. Everything went smoothly, and the surgery was very successful. However, the prolonged anesthesia still put quite a strain on her body. Therefore, the doctor suggested keeping the patient in the hospital for overnight observation. however, strongly objected. He wanted to take his wife home. A tense argument ensued, and finally, after considering many aspects, he had to let Michelle stay in the hospital for overnight observation. For Martin, that night must have been very uncomfortable. As soon as he woke up the next morning, he rushed to pick up Michelle and take her home. Michelle's face was heavily bandaged, covering even her eyes. For a long time after surgery, what she needed most was rest and recovery. That day their daughter Alexis, who was studying medicine, took time off school to come home and care for her mother. She stayed by her mother's side attentively all day until late at night. As night fell, fatigue began to overtake Alexis, causing her to start dozing off. Just then, Martin appeared with a fake concerned look, saying gently, "Go rest, let me take care of Mom." Without suspicion, Alexis accepted her father's seemingly loving offer and went to her room to rest. Around 6 a.m. the next morning, woke up and hurriedly returned to her mother's room to relieve her father so he could rest. But the scene before her eyes left her stunned and panicked. Her mother, who had been alert and stable just the night before, now lay motionless on the bed, her face pale, her breathing weak. Michelle looked like she was on the brink of death. With her medical knowledge, Alexis couldn't explain this sudden change. She turned to Martin, her voice trembling with worry and suspicion. "How did Mom's condition become so terrible after just one night in your care?" But Martin replied, "Perhaps she overdosed on medication." This answer made Alexis both worried and angry, because everyone in the family knew Michelle rarely took medication, as she was very sensitive to drugs. How could her husband, who was also a doctor, give such an unreasonable explanation? Alexis felt her father seemed to be hiding something, but she didn't want to probe further, as long as her mother recovered. That evening, while Alexis was bathing her mother, Michelle said, "Every time I wake up, Martin gives me medicine. I don't know what I've been taking. At night, when I vomit, he rushes over and gives me many other medications." Alexis was surprised to hear this, because facelift surgery absolutely doesn't require taking so much medication. Moreover, taking medication recklessly could be fatal. But no matter how much Alexis asked for details, her mother didn't want to say more, only repeating one sentence. "If anything happens to me, it's definitely not your father's doing." Then she burst into tears. Alexis was also shocked by this statement. Afterwards, she cared for her mother meticulously, reducing the medication use and recording each type of medication, along with the time of use. On April 6th, Martin took Michelle to the hospital for a post-surgery checkup. The doctor said Michelle's wound was healing very well. Her spirit was quite good, so she would recover soon. On April 10th, they went to the hospital again. By this time, Michelle had recovered almost completely. But strangely, Martin still asked the doctor to prescribe 30 more strong painkillers. During recovery, Michelle indeed needed to take 1 or 2 pills a day. But now she was almost fully recovered and didn't need any more medication. The doctor felt it was a bit odd, but still wrote the prescription. That day, Alexis had to return to school to continue her studies. After all, her mother had recovered almost completely. Her health had no major issues, so even without her care it would be fine. On the morning of April 11th, at 8:44 a.m., Michelle called her daughter Alexis. During this call, she expressed great joy because Martin had been taking care of her in recent days. At this moment, she was like a young girl discussing her crush with her best friend. After the phone call, Alexis could finally focus on her studies with peace of mind. At 9:10 a.m., Martin used his office phone to call Alexis. But she didn't receive it because she was in class at the time. Later, when Alexis saw the missed call, she felt very strange. Her father rarely called her. As far as she could remember, her father usually saved phone numbers directly into his mobile phone, rather than intentionally memorizing anyone's number. This meant that her father had looked up her number on his mobile phone, then used the office phone to call. So why not use the mobile phone to call directly? This call seemed like a deliberate attempt to show that around 9 a.m. he was working seriously in the office. At 9:17 a.m. Martin left a voicemail for Michelle saying, "Don't call anyone, don't go anywhere. I'm very worried about you. I'll come home to make sandwiches for you. We'll have lunch together." That day, Martin was supposed to be on duty at a booth at the Development Safety Center exhibition, but he didn't show up at the exhibition until around 11 a.m. Not only was he late, but he was also very irritable, even being complained about by others. However, he seemed completely unconcerned about being complained about, repeatedly emphasizing that he had to leave immediately, had to pick up his daughter from school, and take care of his sick wife. Around 11:30 a.m., he picked up his youngest daughter, Ada, from school and went home together. When they got home, Martin went straight to the kitchen to cook, while 6-year-old Ada went to look for her mother. Not long after, Ada ran into the kitchen and pulled her father's hand towards the bathroom. The little girl said urgently that Mom needed help. When Martin arrived at the bathroom, he saw Michelle not wearing pants, her upper body fallen into the bathtub, looking like she had slipped into the tub. He quickly told Ada to go call the neighbors for help, because he couldn't lift Michelle out of the bathtub alone. At the same time, he also called 911. After the neighbors arrived, they worked together to get Michelle out of the bathtub and tried to perform CPR. Martin was a doctor, so everyone listened to him. He started performing mouth-to-mouth resuscitation on Michelle, while the neighbors did chest compressions. However, according to the neighbor doing chest compressions, when Martin was performing mouth-to-mouth on Michelle, they didn't see her chest moving up and down. At 11:55 a.m., the police arrived at the scene. They saw Martin shouting in agony. Why did she have surgery? Why did she take so many medications? As he shouted, he pounded on Michelle's chest. Clearly, he had given up hope. Notably, when the police continued CPR, a large amount of water flowed out of Michelle's mouth. Both were performing CPR, but Martin's actions seemed not as effective. At this point, the police asked what had happened, and Martin said, "This is my beloved wife. She just had a facelift surgery. She's been taking a lot of medication recently. It must be due to the effects of the medication that she fell into the bathtub." The police saw Martin wearing a white coat, so they believed what he said. At 12:19 p.m., the ambulance arrived and took Michelle away. The emergency doctor received a pale and cold Michelle. Her heart had completely stopped beating. The doctor was very confused. Usually, CPR could make the patient's skin color somewhat rosy again. But the woman before him didn't look like she had been rescued in time. However, the doctor still wanted to try one more time to see if they could save her. Unfortunately, they ultimately failed. Unexpectedly, Michelle's words from a few days ago had become reality. At 2 p.m. that day, Martin returned home from the hospital. After hearing the news, the children also rushed back one by one. Martin asked his daughter Erin to clean up her mother's medications, saying he didn't want to see objects that reminded him of his wife. Erin complied without thinking, but after cleaning up, she suddenly realized that these things could be evidence. She asked Martin why he told her to do this, but he refused to answer. Previously, Alexis, who had been caring for her mother devotedly, also discovered something was amiss. Not only did the medications mysteriously disappear, but even her meticulous records of her mother's medication use vanished. Even her mother's personal belongings had been cleaned out, as if someone was trying to erase all traces. Martin seemed to realize that his actions were being suspected. To prove his innocence, he told his daughter, "We must complete the autopsy. That way, people won't blame me for your mother's death." The autopsy results were as he expected. The report showed that Michelle had cardiovascular disease, and the direct cause of death was drowning. The conclusion was natural death. However, Alexis didn't believe these results. She still believed that her mother's death was not natural, and it must have been caused by her father. She even changed her last name and vowed never to use her father's surname again. She began collecting evidence and rallying her siblings to her side, determined to seek justice for her mother. When they started investigating Martin, they discovered that this happy family had been a lie all along. The father they respected and admired turned out to be a highly intelligent criminal. He was violent, cold, deceitful, untrustworthy, his entire life full of falsehoods. Martin McNeil was born on February 1st, 1956 in Kenton, New Jersey. Unlike Michelle, he grew up in a poor family with 5 siblings. Not only were circumstances difficult, but his parents also argued constantly. The stories about Martin's past revealed by Anna, his lover, further illuminated the dark nature that had formed very early on. With frightening pride, Martin recounted how he tried to kill his own mother when he was just 8 years old, as well as how he skillfully staged the natural death of his brother. In 1973, Martin enlisted in the military. When the military examined his health, they discovered he was a psychiatric patient. He confessed that obsessive images often appeared in his mind, urging him to commit murder. Recognizing the potential danger, the military decided to prohibit Martin from handling firearms. Less than 2 years later, he requested leave due to mental health issues. He deceived the military, claiming he was completely unable to study and work anymore. For over 30 years after that, he received nearly $100,000 in benefits from the Department of Veterans Affairs. Later, even his transcript for medical school admission was forged. On February 21, 1978, married Michelle. 4 months after the wedding, Martin was sentenced to 6 months in prison for forgery, theft, and fraud. However, Michelle didn't leave him because of this. Afterwards, they had 4 children. In 1994, Martin was accused of having an affair with a patient. Michelle was heartbroken and wanted a divorce. But Martin threatened that he would do something reckless. In August 2000 and 2005, Michelle caught Martin watching pornography twice. She expressed her desire for divorce, but Martin continued to threaten her. Some might say, just for watching pornography, she wanted a divorce. Isn't that excessive? Actually, watching pornography is a major taboo in the Mormon faith. Therefore, a devout believer like Michelle couldn't accept her husband, also a believer, watching such films. In March 2005, Martin began an extramarital affair with his lover, Anna. During one intimate encounter, Anna was nearly choked to death by Martin. Not only was he physically rough, but he also said threatening words. He asked Anna if she wanted to die in his hands, and he knew how to use various drugs to make it look like a natural death. In November of the same year, Anna cut off contact with Martin. However, soon after, Martin met another lover online named Gypsy Willis who said, "We met a few times each month. It was very casual. As long as we had time, we could arrange to meet. About half the time we met, we were intimate." February 21, 2007 was Martin and Michelle's wedding anniversary. Daughter Alexis discovered a suitcase full of women's clothes in her father's car. She told her mother about this discovery. On March 16th, when Michelle and her daughter secretly checked Martin's call history, there was a number that appeared frequently. Therefore, Michelle had a big argument with Martin about this. Also around that time, Martin announced to everyone that he had cancer and was about to die. In fact, he didn't know that Michelle and the daughters had secretly seen his examination report. He wasn't sick at all. It was because Michelle already knew her husband wasn't ill that she agreed to get the facelift surgery. In her eyes, perhaps becoming more beautiful could make her husband return to her and stay away from his mistress. Afterwards, under Martin's strong insistence, Michelle had the facelift surgery and then passed away. Although there was no direct evidence, all the suspicious points pointed towards Martin. He disregarded Michelle's high blood pressure and psychological issues, insisting on the surgery, and even asked the doctor to prescribe 5 different medications. On the night of April 4th, Martin began implementing his plan. He continuously gave Michelle medication, making her take pills every time she woke up, forcing her if she didn't want to. When Michelle vomited many pills in the middle of the night, he rushed over and continued giving her more medication. On April 5th, Alexis discovered her mother's condition was very poor, so she began caring for her mother herself. By April 10th, her mother had recovered almost completely. But Alexis couldn't have imagined that just one day after she left, her mother would die in the bathtub. Not only her daughter, but even the doctor who examined Michelle found it hard to believe. Although Michelle had high blood pressure and psychological issues, her body was very healthy and couldn't suddenly pass away. Moreover, before the incident, she had almost stopped taking medication. There was no reason to suddenly take many medications on April 11th, unless someone forced her to. The most suspicious point was Martin's statement. He said Michelle wasn't wearing pants, looked like she was about to take a bath, but then fainted and fell into the bathtub, then drowned. However, Ada, the young daughter who first discovered Michelle, said her mother was wearing dark workout clothes lying in the bathtub. It looked like she had fainted and then been put into the bathtub by someone, because no one would lie in a bathtub fully clothed. Ada was only 6 years old. Could she be lying? There was also a coroner who examined Michelle who wrote in his report, Michelle's legs, back, and buttocks had bruises. This suggested she died lying on her back, not slumped over the bathtub as Martin said. Many signs indicated Martin was lying. In the 911 call, he said he was performing CPR, but in reality, he wasn't doing anything. Later, when the neighbors arrived, he perhaps only pretended to do it for show. He even wiped away some suspicious blood stains in front of the neighbors. However, suspicious points ultimately remained just suspicious points. Without evidence, no one could be arrested. But this was enough to get the police's attention. Therefore, an investigation into him was being conducted quietly. Afterwards, Martin organized a funeral for Michelle. However, he only allowed a few people from Michelle's family to attend. At the funeral, Martin hardly said anything about Michelle, but only introduced himself. He talked about how miserable his life had been, speaking sincerely and emotionally. It seemed like the person in the coffin wasn't his wife, but himself. He was lamenting for himself. At the dinner table, Martin started saying, "I'll have to get used to the life of a single man, can only play with friends and golf." Then he laughed to himself. It's unclear if it was a bitter laugh or if he was genuinely happy. Michelle's sister found this not funny at all, even disgusting. At this funeral, Martin even invited his mistress, Willis. In fact, their relationship had never been interrupted, even during the days right after Michelle's death, and even during the funeral ceremony. After the funeral, Martin's attitude towards the children got increasingly worse. He kicked Alexis, who always suspected him, out of the house. He found a nanny for the children, but this person didn't do anything. Didn't pick up the children, didn't do laundry, didn't cook. And this nanny was actually Martin's mistress, Willis. On May 23rd, Martin had inappropriate intimate actions with Alexis, even caressing her. He kissed her hand and said, "Sorry, I miss your mother so much. I thought you were her." By July, Martin had arranged for his adopted daughter, Giselle McNeil, to return to Ukraine. It should have only taken 2 months for her to come back. But in reality, Giselle stayed in Ukraine for nearly a year. This was because Martin had lent Giselle's identity to his mistress, Willis. Willis owed tens of thousands of dollars in taxes. Doing this, they not only didn't have to pay the money anymore, but also got rid of a burden. In June 2008, Martin called his daughter, Vanessa, over. Vanessa had been using illegal substances for a long time, so this time she thought her father wanted her to go to rehab. However, her father held her hand and said, "I will end your life, then end my own." Fortunately, this time it was just a threat, and Martin didn't actually act, but these words terrified Vanessa. It turned out Martin said this because he always felt Vanessa embarrassed him. Actually, little Ada was Vanessa's child with an ex-boyfriend. Because of the out-of-wedlock pregnancy, if this news spread, it would cause the family to lose face completely. Martin was a person who cared a lot about face, so he kept Ada under the pretense of adoption. Therefore, Ada had to call her birth mother sister and her grandmother mother. By 2009, Martin had been arrested and imprisoned for identity theft. During his time in prison, the police investigation and his daughter's investigation into him had also come to an end. Could justice prevail in a case with almost no evidence? On January 16, 2010, Damien, the only son in the family, ended his life by overdosing on prescription drugs. Before his death, he suddenly became quite aggressive. Over the years, he had endured the pain of losing his mother. In fact, in his heart, he knew clearly that the killer was very likely his own father. He really couldn't live with the person who had killed his mother. Or perhaps because he studied law, he felt the hope of convicting his father was too slim. In October of that year, the natural death conclusion in the autopsy report was changed to undetermined. The doctor pointed out that the combination of several different drugs, such as Valium, Lortab, Percocet, Ambien, and Finergon, could very likely cause difficulty breathing, loss of consciousness, respiratory depression, and coma. This meant that on the morning of April 11th, in 1 or 2 hours before 11 a.m., Martin had returned home, forced Michelle to take multiple medications, causing her to lose consciousness, then carried her into the bathtub and ran the water to drown her. In 2011, Willis was also sentenced to 3 years in prison for participating in the identity theft scheme. In July 2012, Martin was released from prison. Subsequently, the Utah Attorney General's office charged him with killing Michelle. On October 17, 2013, Martin's trial began. The prosecution turned Martin's life inside out. It was only then that people truly learned about Martin's real character. His 2 lovers, some of his daughters, the girlfriend of his only son Damien, Michelle's plastic surgeon, and even inmates who had been in prison with Martin, all testified in court. At this point, Martin had become the center of attention. Everyone wanted to put him in prison. The lead prosecutor said, this was an almost perfect murder. Martin gave her a lot of medication. He knew that once she died, it would be very difficult to detect. However, the defense declared that Martin's past misdeeds couldn't lead to the conclusion that Michelle's death was related to him. They even told a parable in court. The defense wanted to tell the jury not to jump to conclusions and not to let emotions sway them. But no matter how well the defense spoke, Martin still couldn't explain what he had done during that time on the morning Michelle died. Moreover, his other behaviors were also very unusual. Lying about having cancer, pretending to use a cane to make people believe he couldn't move Michelle alone, lying to 911 causing delays in rescue efforts, lying to investigators leading to the cause of death being determined as natural. There were too many suspicious points that he himself couldn't explain. Therefore, everyone believed that Martin had the motive, the time, and the ability to kill his wife Michelle. After 22 days of trial, on November 9, 2013, in a situation without direct evidence, the court relied on testimonies from many people, Martin's past, and many suspicious points about him to convict Martin of first-degree murder, obstruction of justice, and sexual abuse, with a sentence of 17 years without parole. When hearing the verdict, some of the daughters couldn't hold back their tears. People had gotten the truth, but the price paid was too high. Looking back at this case, Martin was the source of chaos. Neither his beautiful wife nor his lovely children could change his nature. It seemed that killing in his mind wasn't a terrible crime. His behavior had many similarities with cold psychopaths. Lack of empathy, no sense of guilt, no fear, but extremely selfish, arrogant, and prone to lying. Martin was truly a cruel person, treating murder as casually as cutting grass, seeing nothing significant about it. Moreover, he didn't realize it was wrong. So when he wanted to live with his mistress, he used a combination of drugs to make Michelle die naturally. Instead of thinking like a normal person about divorce or maintaining an extramarital relationship, he felt that was too troublesome. Killing Michelle would be more convenient and quicker. Story 2. A woman's mummified body was found preserved in a sewer pipe for 3 years. The only intact part of her body was her left finger, still pointing into the dark depths of the tunnel. So what really happened in this dark and cramped pipe? This case has been dubbed the secret of the marriage hidden in the tunnel. In Liaoyuan City, Jilin Province, China, on December 10, 2012, the northeastern region of China was experiencing its coldest season of the year, with temperatures dropping to minus 22 degrees Fahrenheit, causing many locals to stay indoors. However, as a worker tasked with repairing underground heating pipes, Zhao Liguang had to go to work as usual. He crawled into the tunnel to inspect and repair it, ensuring a normal heat supply for local residents. But just 3 minutes into the pipe, a foul odor wafted towards him from ahead. Based on his experience, Zhao suspected it was likely the corpse of a small animal, such as a dead rat, in the pipe. He turned on his flashlight and continued forward to investigate. In the dark, long pipe, Zhao's vision was somewhat obscured, but he noticed something resembling a withered tree trunk blocking the narrow passage. As the stench intensified, he bravely approached to take a closer look. The horrifying sight he encountered made him feel immediately uneasy. About 15 minutes later, police from the Criminal Investigation Unit of Liaoyuan City arrived at the scene. Through a preliminary examination, the police discovered that the body stuck in the underground pipe had been dried out by the heat from the pipe, resembling a mummy. However, only the torso and left arm remained. Other body parts had vanished. The chest and abdomen had also severely decomposed. The overall condition was nothing short of horrifying and macabre. Based on this examination, the police made 4 assessments. First, although the victim's identity had not yet been established, the sewer pipe where the body was found was likely not the original crime scene. After committing the crime, the perpetrator had dismembered the victim before disposing of the body in the pipe. Second, due to the cramped space inside the pipe, which was only about 3 to 4 feet wide and high, and the complex environment with many heating conduits, the police believed that the person who disposed of the body was likely a physically fit adult male who carried out the entire process alone. Third, when discovered by maintenance workers, the body was stuck between the pipe and the wall. Curiously, the only remaining arm pointed towards the darker end of the tunnel. In such a confined space, why did the body assume such a strange position? The Liaoyuan police speculate that when disposing of the body, the perpetrator likely did not simply throw the corpse into the pipe, but instead pulled the left arm of the body and dragged it to the relatively concealed section of the tunnel. The ability to commit such a brutal act in a complex, dark environment suggests that the perpetrator either has a perverse mindset or is very psychologically stable. Along with the analysis of this particular dumping site, the police made a 4th assessment. They believed the perpetrator was likely quite familiar with the area where the body was disposed of, and that the distance traveled with the body was not too far. Therefore, the initial crime scene might be near the sewer pipe. However, since many body parts are still missing, identifying the true identity of the victim became a top priority for the police in solving the case. After careful consideration, the police decided to excavate the entire section of the sewer pipe, bringing all the body parts to the surface for a more detailed examination of the crime scene. After about 5 hours of strenuous digging, the mummified body stored in the sewer pipe was finally completely removed and immediately transported to the police department for an autopsy. During the excavation, forensic technicians also found a red bra and a pendant near the body in the soil. However, with only these items, the police were still unable to determine the identity of the victim. So, where were the remaining body parts hidden? Investigators awaited the results of the autopsy while continuing to search for useful clues in the underground tunnel. It was noted that the sewer pipe was located in a busy area near several local factories, where workers frequently passed through this narrow path. Additionally, residents living nearby often use this shortcut when entering or leaving their neighborhood. Typically, choosing such a crowded place to dispose of a body would not be an ideal option unless the perpetrator had specific considerations. To find the remaining body parts, several investigators took turns crawling into the dark sewer to conduct a difficult search. About 2 days later, they finally made a new discovery. In a corner not far from where the mummified body was found, investigators discovered a suspicious fabric bag. Due to the passage of time, the surface of the bag showed signs of decay. Upon opening the bag, they first found a jacket and a carving knife. There were also some other items, but the investigators on the scene did not dare to touch them carelessly. They immediately brought the bag to the forensic examination room. After thorough inspection, the forensic team discovered that the bag contained a human head and 3 body parts. Subsequent tests confirmed that all these body parts belonged to the previously discovered victim. Based on the increasingly complete body parts, the forensic team quickly prepared a report on the autopsy. The victim was a woman, approximately 30 years old, standing about 5 feet 4 inches tall, with a time of death at least 3 years prior. Regarding the cause of death, the forensic team also provided a preliminary conclusion. They believed the victim had been violently attacked by an unidentified object while still alive, ultimately leading to death by asphyxiation. This was supported by the discovery of a broken rib in the victim's body, which is a common indicator of death by mechanical asphyxiation following an attack. As for the carving knife that had rusted due to oxidation, the forensic team speculated that it was likely the tool used by the perpetrator to dismember the victim. Given that a considerable amount of time had passed since the crime, any traces of the perpetrator left on the victim's body had likely been severely degraded. This undoubtedly posed a significant challenge for the police investigation. To quickly identify the true identity of the victim, the police began reviewing local missing persons cases, focusing on women who had gone missing between 3 to 5 years prior to the discovery of the body. Through these 2 filtering criteria, they quickly narrowed it down to one missing woman. This woman, named Zhang Xiaoqiu, was a local resident of Liaoyuan, and her age and height matched those of the female corpse found in the sewer pipe. The police then reached out to Xiaoqiu's husband and parents. During the identification of the body, Xiaoqiu's husband, Sun Xianghui, was the first to recognize the pendant and the long-sleeved black jacket. Xiaoqiu's parents also provided blood samples for DNA analysis. The final results confirmed that the nameless body found in the sewer pipe was indeed Xiaoqiu, who had been missing for over 3 years. At this point, the police were surprised at how smoothly the identification process had gone. However, the subsequent investigation proved to be far more complex than the detectives had imagined. By checking related records, the police discovered that Zhang Xiaoqiu went missing on the evening of September 9, 2009, exactly 3 years prior. According to statements from Xiaoqiu's family, around 6:30 p.m. on the day she went missing, Xiaoqiu, who lived near Dongshan Street No. 4, had dinner at her father Zhang Juanqing's house and returned home around 7 p.m. At that time, Xiaoqiu even called her father to assure him she was safe. By around midnight that evening, her husband returned home from work to find that his wife was missing. He also discovered that a large suitcase that had been in the house was gone. Some cosmetics and clothes in his wife's bedroom were also missing. At that moment, Sun thought his wife might have gone on a business trip, as just 2 days prior, on September 7th, Xiaoqiu had told Sun that she would be going to Beijing for work with the owner of a curtain store in the coming days. However, on the morning of September 10th, the owner of the curtain store, Wu Chunhua, suddenly came to Xiaoqiu's house and angrily asked Sun, "Where is Xiaoqiu?" Why didn't she arrive at the train station on time? I have the train tickets, and she isn't answering my calls. Faced with this barrage of questions, Sun expressed his confusion. He believed his wife had left home the night before for a business trip. To quickly find Xiaoqiu, Sun and Wu Chunhua went to the Dongshan District Police Department to report her missing. That year, the police first went to Xiaoqiu's home to conduct a detailed search. According to their notes from the investigation, apart from Xiaoqiu's cell phone, some cosmetics, clothing she often wore, and a large suitcase, the other items remained untouched. Furthermore, the arrangement of these items was relatively tidy. The investigators did not find any signs of a struggle in the rooms, nor any suspicious blood stains. Since Xiaoqiu and her husband often left their child at the maternal grandparents' house, and Sun returned home at midnight, no one could clearly state what had happened that evening. However, based on the results of the crime scene examination, the police formulated a theory. They believed that Xiaoqiu's mysterious disappearance likely occurred after she left home, as her suitcase and some personal belongings also went missing at the same time. According to Wu Chunhua, the scheduled business trip with Zhang Xiaoqiu was for the morning of September 10th. Although the train tickets to Beijing had been purchased in advance, there was no reason for Xiaoqiu to pull her suitcase out of the house alone at such an early hour unless one of two scenarios occurred. First, on the night of her disappearance, Xiaoqiu needed to go out for something very urgent. Second, Xiaoqiu was called out by someone she deeply trusted. Therefore, the police began to investigate and interrogate Xiaoqiu's social relationships. According to Sun's statements before her disappearance, his wife worked as a sales manager at a home decor store in the city. Due to her outgoing personality, she enjoyed socializing with friends and occasionally attended gatherings outside, often returning late. However, after investigating, the police found that on the night of her disappearance, Xiaoqiu did not have any plans to meet friends. According to several friends' accounts from that evening, Xiaoqiu was at home chatting online with them. During the chat, Xiaoqiu repeatedly mentioned that she needed to wake up early the next day to catch a train, so she logged off around 10 p.m. to end the conversation. By extracting Xiaoqiu's QQ chat history, the police were able to verify the statements of her friends. This means that around 10 p.m. on the night she disappeared, Xiaoqiu was still safe at home. Sun returned home from work to find his wife missing around midnight. What could have happened to Xiaoqiu in that short 2-hour window? The police then continued to extract Xiaoqiu's phone call records. The results showed that her last call was to her father, Zhang Juanxing, at 7:05 p.m. on September 9th. After this time, there were no more recorded calls or messages on Xiaoqiu's phone. Was Xiaoqiu's sudden departure from home after 10 p.m. planned? Or did she not leave voluntarily that night, but was actually murdered at home before the perpetrator disposed of her body in the nearby sewer? Regardless of the possibility, the only thing the police could confirm was that the initial crime scene was likely very close to Xiaoqiu's apartment complex. The sewer where the perpetrator disposed of the body was only about 1,000 feet away from Xiaoqiu's residence. This also meant that the murderer must have been quite familiar with both the apartment complex and the sewer where the body was discarded. According to the records from that year, after Xiaoqiu went missing, her husband showed significant grief, crying profusely when reporting the case to the police. However, given the specific time of Xiaoqiu's disappearance and the level of familiarity the perpetrator had with the crime scene, the police still considered Sun a primary suspect. Through their investigation, the police quickly learned that Sun Xianghui had voluntarily enlisted in the military when he was younger and served in Harbin, Heilongjiang province. After leaving the military, he returned to his hometown of Liaoyuan and became a coal miner. Specifically, he worked as an underground laborer in the coal mine, meaning he was very familiar with underground environments. This alone was enough to make Sun the biggest suspect in the eyes of the police. However, the subsequent investigation results were completely unexpected for the detectives. According to Xiaoqiu's parents, in the 3 years following their daughter's disappearance, their son-in-law's son did not remarry. He continued to leave their child at the maternal grandparents' house for care and entrusted his paycheck to them for management and use. As long as Sun did not work the night shift, he would regularly go to his in-laws' house for dinner. The family relationship remained harmonious. In Sun's home, the wedding photo of him and Xiaoqiu still hung above the bed in their bedroom, as it always had. Sun told the investigating officers that he wished for his wife's return every day, but he never imagined that after 3 years, the news of her return would be the tragic revelation of her murder. Through their investigation, the police learned that before her disappearance, Xiaoqiu and Sun had a relatively good marital relationship. They had never had any serious conflicts or disagreements. Sun had also never taken out high-value accident insurance for Xiaoqiu, and there were no financial or property disputes between the couple, such as concerning their house or cars. In other words, Sun's motive for the crime was unclear. Considering that the perpetrator might be hiding close to Zhang Xiaoxiao's home, the police began to organize investigative teams to search the surrounding residential buildings. The apartment complex where Xiaoxiao lived consisted of 2 buildings, and surrounding it were some older, peaceful residential structures. When the people in the area learned that a female body had recently been found in the heating pipe, everyone was curious and showed interest. However, Sun, as the victim's husband, appeared quite indifferent upon learning that his wife had been murdered. Typically, he should have proactively contacted the police to inquire about the progress of the investigation. Instead, Sun showed no signs of concern whatsoever. In contrast, Xiaoqiu's father, Zhang Juanqing, had called the investigating officers multiple times to ask about the situation. According to Zhang Juanqing, after his daughter Xiaoqiu went missing, his wife developed a serious heart condition. As a result, he had to spend most of his time at home taking care of his wife and granddaughter. Before Xiaoqiu's body was discovered, the couple had held on to a glimmer of hope, thinking their daughter might have just left home in a fit of anger. Some neighbors even speculated that Xiaoqiu had run away with another man. When hearing these rumors, the couple sometimes wished they could believe they were true, because in that case, at least their daughter would still be alive. However, with the discovery of their daughter's body, their hope of 3 years was completely shattered. Zhang Junqing recalled that, although his daughter had a friendly face, the people she interacted with daily were quite mundane. Around 1997, Xiaoqiu met a former soldier named Lu Jigong. At that time, Xiaoqiu often brought her boyfriend Lu Jigong home for meals, so Zhang Junqing remembered him quite well. However, for unknown reasons, 2 years later, in 1999, Xiaoqiu began dating another boyfriend, Sun Xianghui. Although Sun was also a former soldier, it was clear that Xiaoqiu valued this second relationship more. Around 2000, the two entered the stage of discussing marriage. However, at that time, Sun's economic situation was not good, and Zhang Juanqing and his wife did not approve of the marriage. Then, one morning 2 months later, Xiaoqiu suddenly announced, "I'm pregnant." This prompted Zhang Juanqing and his wife to reluctantly agree to their marriage. To facilitate mutual care, Xiaoqiu suggested buying an apartment in the old neighborhood of Liaoyuan as their marital home. Moreover, the apartment in this complex had to be no more than 1 kilometer from her parents' house. Sun agreed to this choice without hesitation. What surprised everyone even more was that after they got married, Sun excelled in every aspect. In addition to working hard and taking care of his wife and children, he also showed great respect for his in-laws. In daily life, Sun treated Zhang Juanqing and his wife almost like his own parents. Even in the 3 years following Xiaoqiu's disappearance, this behavior did not change. However, after Xiaoqiu's body was discovered, Zhang Juanqing noticed that some of Sun Xianghui's daily behaviors began to seem odd. For example, he would forget to pick up their child from school, and a smoking habit he had given up for over 3 years suddenly returned. Seeing these unusual behaviors, Zhang Juanqing felt a deep internal conflict. On one hand, he hoped the police could quickly solve the case and bring his daughter's murderer to justice. On the other hand, he wished his son-in-law was not involved in this incident. Due to this psychological struggle, Zhang Juanqing cautiously asked Sun, "Do you know anything about Xiaoqiu's death?" In response, Sun, who had always been calm, suddenly appeared quite agitated. He raised his voice with Zhang Juanqing, saying, "How could I do something so terrible? I can't even carry Xiaoqiu." Upon hearing Zhang Juanqing recount this statement, Chief Wu Chunhua and her team immediately recognized the suspicious nature of it. According to normal psychological logic, if Sun was not involved in the case, he should have provided simple and vague justifications when faced with his father-in-law's suspicion. For instance, he could have emphasized the deep feelings between him and Xiaoqiu, stating that he would never harm her, or offered some other reasons to prove his innocence. However, Sun's comment, "I can't even carry Zhang Xiaoqiu," clearly contained details that suggested knowledge about the disposal of the body. If he had not experienced it personally, he would not have been able to articulate such a specific description of the act. On December 25th, 2012, the police approached Sun and brought him to the station for questioning. Surprisingly, in the interrogation room, Sun showed no signs of resistance. He quickly admitted to the crime of murdering his wife, Xiaoqiu. Sun told the investigating officers, "I killed my wife. This is different from what I said before. At this point, I no longer need to hide anything." So what was Sun's motive? What truly happened on that fateful night 3 years ago? Let's go back 13 years to the year 2000. After marrying due to an unexpected pregnancy, the lives of Sun and Xiaoqiu appeared to be peaceful on the surface. But in reality, an undercurrent of turmoil was silently building. In Sun's eyes, his wife, Xiaoqiu, was always a woman who attracted a lot of attention. Not only was she beautiful, but she also enjoyed enhancing her appearance. While friends around Sun envied him for marrying such a lovely wife, Sun always believed that this was a double-edged sword that was difficult to control. On one hand, he felt proud to have a beautiful wife. On the other hand, he suspected that Xiaoqiu might be unfaithful to him. After their child was born and Xiaoqiu returned to work, the unease that simmered in Sun's heart gradually morphed into an invisible pressure. Sun recounted to the investigating officers that one time when Xiaoqiu came home from work, she mentioned something that quickly planted the seeds of doubt in his mind. Xiaoqiu casually told Sun Xianghui, "Today, a male client came to the company and actively suggested he wanted to be friends with me. So your wife is still quite attractive." This was meant to be a light-hearted comment between husband and wife, but Sun took it to heart. He said that each time Xiaoqiu went out to socialize with friends, he couldn't help but imagine all sorts of scenarios. He also discovered that Xiaoqiu had previously had a romantic relationship with Lu Jigong, a fellow soldier from his time in the military. This revelation only added to Sun's psychological burden. As a result, he began searching for a way to escape. Gradually, Sun fell into gambling. Initially, he just tried to win a little money to fill the void he felt inside. However, over time, gambling became the only way for him to avoid facing reality. Meanwhile, Xiaoqiu was unaware of these changes in her husband. It wasn't until one day when creditors from the casino came to their home demanding payment that Sun's secret was exposed. After intense questioning, Xiaoqiu was shocked to discover that Sun had even secretly taken money from her father Zhang Juanxing's savings account to gamble. This revelation left Xiaoqiu feeling deeply disappointed and angry. To prevent Sun from continuing to spiral into gambling, she decided to implement stricter financial controls. First, Sun's paycheck was given to her father, Zhang Juanxing, to manage directly. Then, Sun's daily expenses were cut down to the bare minimum. Sun stated that every day when he left the house, he was only allowed to take 10 to 20 yuan, about $1.50 to $3. This amount was barely enough for him to buy a pack of cheap cigarettes. Living under such financial control was hard for outsiders to believe, but Sun claimed he had lived this way for 10 years. Although he often felt angry and humiliated, he chose not to rebel. Instead, he silently buried his resentment inside. Furthermore, Sun always harbored suspicion, believing that his beautiful wife might be betraying him. Especially the subsequent events heightened Sun's nerves. The first incident was when Xiaoqiu changed jobs and became a sales manager at a local home decor store, where the male store owner seemed quite close to her. The second incident was when Xiaoqiu's ex-boyfriend, Lu Jigong, suddenly reached out one day to say, "A few friends are planning a get-together." To outsiders, the couple still appeared to love each other as before, but only Sun knew that their marriage had long lost any respect and had become a life sentence he couldn't escape. Fast forward to September 7th, 2009, when Zhang told Sun that in 2 days, she would be going on a business trip to Beijing with her boss, Wu Chunhua. What was intended as a routine exchange between husband and wife became an opportunity for Sun to act. To create the illusion that Xiaoqiu had disappeared during her business trip, Sun chose to take action the night before she was scheduled to leave. On the evening of September 9th, Sun left work early and returned home. He found Xiaoqiu lying silently in bed, sound asleep. Sun later told the investigating officers that he approached her slowly, then sat on her, tightening his hands around her neck. Although Xiaoqiu struggled fiercely, the pent-up resentment and suspicion within Sun surged forth like a flood. It exerted enough force on her to leave Xiaoqiu completely immobilized. After the act was done, Sun said he felt terrified. It wasn't until midnight that he thought about disposing of the body. His years of experience working underground told him that the sewer near their apartment complex was an ideal place to hide a corpse. Thus, he carried Xiaoqiu's body outside. However, he was unprepared for the weight of her body, which was over 110 pounds, almost causing him to suffocate. On the pitch-black path, carefully opened a manhole cover and placed his wife's body headfirst into the sewer. He attempted to push the body further in, but found the space inside the pipe too cramped. Sun then sneaked back home to grab a carving knife and a burlap sack. After dismembering the body, he secretly disposed of the parts at various locations. It wasn't until around 4 a.m. the following morning that Sun crawled out of the sewer and returned home. To maintain the illusion that his wife had gone on a business trip, he packed some of Xiaoqiu's cosmetics, clothing, along with her cell phone and wallet into a large suitcase. He then hid this suitcase in the sewer as well. About a month later, believing that the police had stopped their investigation, Sun took the suitcase out in the middle of the night. The next morning, he brought the suitcase to a small forest on the outskirts and burned it to destroy the evidence. To cover up his crime, Sun continued to leave their child with the maternal grandparents. Financially, he kept only a small portion for living expenses, while his paycheck remained under the management of his father-in-law, Zhang Juanxing. For more than 3 years, even though the body of Zhang Xiaoqiu had not been discovered, Sun told the investigating officers. Throughout the interrogation, Sun did not attempt to justify his actions. Instead, he sincerely confessed to the entire truth of his crime and expressed genuine remorse. This surprised the investigating officers. On December 6, 2013, the Liaoyuan Intermediate People's Court delivered a preliminary verdict. The defendant's son was convicted of murder and sentenced to death with a 2-year reprieve, along with a lifetime deprivation of political rights. After reviewing this tragic and bizarre family case, some expressed feelings of confusion. They found Sun's motive for the crime hard to believe. After 10 years of marriage, a couple should ideally leave behind warmth and sweetness. Yet, Sun Xianghui stubbornly chose to destroy that himself. Was this ultimately a distortion of humanity or a distortion of human nature? The next case takes place in Puyang Township, located in the center of Zhonghua County, Taiwan. This is a very peaceful and simple place. 70% of the population here makes a living from farming. So when a village chief spotted a strange object floating in the river, he never thought it would turn out to be a human body. The incident occurred on October 29, 2021. Mr. Nanda was taking a midday break to visit friends, and on his way back to the city, he admired the beautiful Dongluo River. Suddenly, something strange caught his eye. He vaguely saw a human-shaped object floating in the river. At first, Mr. Nanda thought it was just a discarded doll, but upon closer inspection, he noticed that there were a lot of fish surrounding it. After thinking it over and taking a good look, the village chief broke into a cold sweat and quickly called the police. So, what exactly was this object? The police quickly arrived at the scene and confirmed that it was not a doll, but a body submerged in the water. They immediately arranged personnel to recover the victim. During the recovery process, the police noticed several strange things about the body. The legs were tied with ropes to 2 hollow bricks weighing about 175 pounds. One of the hollow bricks was stuck in the mud, preventing the body from being pulled out. After much effort, the police finally managed to retrieve the body. Upon closer examination, they realized that this was not a simple accident involving someone falling into the water. The body wasn't just tied to the bricks, but also had its hands and feet bound with ropes. Additionally, the body was covered in black plastic bags. The strangest detail was that the victim's eyes and mouth were sealed with black tape. This was believed to have roots in Taiwanese folklore, where it signifies that the sinful soul would not be able to see the murderer, and therefore could not return to seek revenge. The news of the case spread quickly, and the villagers began to gossip, causing an atmosphere of panic to quickly take over. So who is this person? What was his connection to this small mountain village? Everyone wanted answers, but finding them wasn't easy. Since the body had been in the water for a long time, by the time it was recovered, the skin was severely decayed and the face was swollen, making it impossible to determine the identity just by looking at the victim. Forensic doctors also attempted to retrieve the victim's fingerprints, but were initially unsuccessful. Finally, after many efforts, a fingerprint was recovered from the ring finger on the left hand. It turned out that the deceased wasn't a resident of Puyang, but a man named Zhang Kaijun, who lived in Taipei. The police immediately notified his family, who revealed that his son had reported him missing about 2 weeks earlier. But the big question remains, Why did Zhang Kaijun end up in this small mountain village? It turns out that on October 15th, Zhang had told his son that he would be heading south to spend a few days with his girlfriend. But after that, they lost contact. So Zhang's son called his father's girlfriend, but she replied that Zhang had left after they had an argument on the 16th, and she too was looking for him. At that point, the son felt that something was wrong and called the police in Taichung. How were the police able to identify Zhang Kaijun so quickly through his fingerprint? In fact, Zhang had been on the police's radar for some time. He was a wealthy businessman, but in reality, a senior member of a fraud gang. As a result, Zhang's fingerprints were already on file with the police. While the police were conducting a thorough investigation into his background, they unexpectedly received a critical lead. Zhang's son mentioned that just a few days after his father went missing, he noticed withdrawals being made from his father's bank account. Since the account was in his name, he would receive notifications every time there was a transaction. This was extremely odd. Zhang had disappeared. So who was making the withdrawals? The police then reviewed surveillance footage from the ATMs and discovered that the person withdrawing the money wasn't Zhang, but two women wearing masks, hats, and fully covering their faces. They had used Zhang's card to withdraw money multiple times in different locations. The police determined that these two women were the key to unlocking the case. While the police were working to identify the women, an unexpected post appeared on social media. The post, made by one of Zhang's friends, stated, "My friend met a young woman at a hotel," and he directly revealed that her real name was Lin Xiyu. After they moved in together one day, 6 men suddenly barged in, claiming to be Xiyu's cousins. They said that her family didn't approve of their relationship and that they had come to take Xiyu away. Zhang's friend, the one writing the post, recounted that Zhang agreed to let her go out of respect for his girlfriend. Before they were forced apart, they even attempted to escape together in a BMW. But in the end, they were unsuccessful. The friend also revealed that the BMW was a car that Zhang had given to Xiyu when they were dating. After being separated for some time, the friend said that one day, while he was out dining with Zhang and other friends, Lin Xiyu suddenly reappeared. The two left together hand in hand. After that, Zhang went to Lukong with Xiyu and had not been heard from since. When the friend finally found Zhang, he had become nothing more than a cold corpse. With this shocking revelation, the friend directly concluded that Xiyu had set a trap to harm others and warned everyone to be cautious. The post caught the attention of the police. In fact, Zhang's girlfriend, Xiyu, was indeed the last person to see him, and one of the women withdrawing money in the surveillance video looked a lot like her. It seemed that Xiyu was indeed very suspicious, so the police decided to investigate her. At the time, Lin Xiyu was 30 years old and had been working at a hotel for the past 3 years. According to her social media account, up until 2020, the photos Xiyu posted showed her dressing in very androgynous clothing. During that time, she kept her hair short and often shared content related to same-sex marriage. Sometimes, she even expressed a desire for love, mentioning it in conversations with female friends. Her job at the hotel wasn't going well at that time. However, at the start of January 2020, she stopped posting after sharing a picture with a female friend. It wasn't until 10 months later that her account was updated, and by then, Xiyu had completely changed her appearance, transforming into a beautiful young woman with long hair. A complete contrast to her previous look. Through investigation, it was revealed that she had changed her appearance, following advice from friends and growing her hair out after undergoing microplastic surgery. Surprisingly, Xiu quickly became a sensation at the hotel and stood out wherever she went. She then met Zhang, a divorced man. He was drawn to her attractive appearance and pursued her immediately. The couple, who had a 21-year age difference, eventually began living together. Zhang provided her with a monthly allowance of 100,000 Taiwan dollars, which is equivalent to 3,100 US dollars. He was also very generous with material things, buying Xiyu anything she wanted, including a BMW sports car in her name. However, Xiyu never posted any photos of herself and Zhang on social media, and her relationship status was displayed as single. Zhang's friends suspected that Xiyu might be bisexual, meaning she could be attracted to both men and women, and they advised Zhang not to get too deeply involved. But he believed that everyone has their own past and didn't pay much attention to it. During the police interrogation, Xiyu remained calm and composed. She told the police, "What does my boyfriend's disappearance have to do with me?" and added, "I'm also looking for Zhang." When asked about her boyfriend's whereabouts, she said that Zhang had gone with her to her hometown in Lekong, Zhonghua on the 15th. And on the 16th, the whole family took a trip to the beach to watch the sunset. She claimed that they had a petty argument on the way, and Zhang kicked her whole family out of the car before driving off on his own. However, in reality, the police had found Zhang Kaijun's car in Taichung the day after he disappeared. What was strange was that the car hadn't been unlocked, and the car keys had been tossed onto the dashboard. After forensic experts examined the car, they didn't find any suspicious evidence. Could it really be, as Sue said earlier, that Zhang drove himself back to Taichung? The police seemed not to trust Xu's story at all. It was clear that the car was part of a trap set by the murderer. To lower Xu's guard, the police never revealed the circumstances surrounding the discovery of the body until the end of the interrogation, where they used it to apply psychological pressure in hopes of getting her to confess. However, Xu did not panic. She continued to act innocent and weak. To prove her innocence, Xu even agreed to let the police search her home, confident that they wouldn't find any evidence. Perhaps she thought all the evidence had been dumped into the Dongluo River. But she overlooked something important. The surveillance footage at the ATM had captured 2 women. Although they were fully covered, the clothes and shoes they wore were likely still at her house. When the police searched Lin Shiyu's home, they were specifically looking for these items. Sure enough, the clothes and shoes seen in the surveillance footage were still there. Surprisingly, even when faced with the evidence the police presented, Shiyu remained unmoved. She claimed, "These are just ordinary clothes." What's so strange about that? Upon further investigation, the police discovered that Shiyu was a transgender man presenting as a woman, which explained why she was so stubborn. Without solid evidence, she was not going to confess. The police then pulled surveillance footage from road cameras on October 16th, documenting Zhang Kaijun's driving route. They discovered something suspicious. A stretch of the journey that should have taken just 5 minutes by car actually took an hour that day. This area was near the Dongluo River, where Zhang's body was found. Clearly, they had stopped during this brief trip. The police confronted Xiao with the question, what were they doing during that time? Xiao could not provide an answer, but she still refused to tell the truth. It wasn't until the police showed her photos of Zhang's corpse that her eyes began to dart around, and she started to crumble. Sensing the moment had come, the police used psychological tactics to finally break her silence. Xiao confessed, "I killed him myself." However, Zhang, though 51 years old, was in excellent health, far too strong to be overpowered so easily by someone as slender as Xiao. The police suspected there were accomplices involved. As the investigation went deeper, the case became even more horrifying, and a shocking truth emerged. On the day Zhang disappeared, Xiao wasn't the only one with him. Her family members were there too. Do you remember the 2 women seen in the ATM surveillance footage? The other woman resembled Shiyu's mother. The answer became clear immediately. The police then interrogated Shiyu's parents. Her mother refused to cooperate, but her father quickly confessed to the crime. Lin Shiyu's father revealed that ever since his daughter started dating Zhang Kaijun, every time she came home, she was covered in scars. Shiyu used to be cheerful and outgoing, but after meeting Zhang, she became increasingly unstable. After asking her what was going on, he discovered that Zhang had been physically abusing her. Naturally, as a father, he wanted to seek justice for his daughter, so he decided to harm Zhang. He also claimed, "I did all of this by myself, and it has nothing to do with my family." Later, Shiyu's mother confessed that she only learned the truth after her husband told her the entire story. However, her own words accidentally revealed her involvement. The police confronted her, saying, "Shiyu has already admitted to being one of the 2 people who stole Zhang's money. The other person was you, wasn't it?" At that moment, she confidently responded his money was all ill-gotten gains. It was all meant for us to use. The woman's mentality truly shocked the police. Next, Shiyu's brother also provided a statement. He said that Shiyu had told the family that she wanted to escape from Zhang Kaijun, and their father immediately supported his daughter's decision, saying, "You should bring your boyfriend here, so we can handle it." So, each family member had a different story. Who was telling the truth? After gathering all the evidence and listening to every confession, the police gradually uncovered the truth and pieced together the timeline of this horrific crime. What made this case particularly unique was that the perpetrator was not just one person, it was the entire family. On October 12, 2021, once again called her father to complain after being abused by Zhang. Xiao's father, enraged by what he heard, demanded that his daughter find a way to invite Zhang to Zhonghua. At that time, the family was living in two different locations, so they held a video conference to divide responsibilities. The parents were tasked with purchasing supplies and finding a place to dispose of Zhang's body, while her brother was assigned to buy sleeping pills. On the 15th, Zhang Kaijun happily traveled south with his girlfriend to visit her hometown. That day, they visited Lekong Old Street and rented a hotel room for the night. Meanwhile, Shiyu's parents were scouting the Dongluo River area for the crime scene. Early the next morning, Lin Fu, Shiyu's father, along with his son, brought the prepared tools, including hemp rope, hollow bricks, plastic bags, and other items to the crime scene and hid them there. After 11 a.m., Shiyu's mother crushed the sleeping pills into powder and added it to Zhang's drink, which her daughter then served him. Zhang had no idea that his girlfriend's entire family was waiting for the drug to take effect, so they could execute their plan to eliminate him. When they saw that Zhang had fallen unconscious due to the effect of the drugs, they pulled over on the side of the road. Su got out of the car to check if he was fully under the influence, and Lin Fu, her father, took responsibility for strangling Zhang with a rope they had prepared. Meanwhile, her brother helped ensure that even if Zhang woke up, he wouldn't be able to resist. After Zhang Kaijun was strangled to death, the Lin family transported his body to the location where they planned to dispose of it. On the way, they discussed and aligned their confessions, preparing for what they would say if the crime was discovered. When they reached the western side of the Dongluo River, they hid in the grass, further tying Zhang up and covering his head with a black plastic bag. They securely fastened hollow bricks to his legs and threw him into the river. Concerned that the water was too shallow, Su's father personally went into the river, dragged the body to the middle of the water, and then returned ashore. Afterward, the family drove to Taichung, abandoning Zhang's car there. Finally, they took the bank card they had found on Zhang and withdrew money from various ATMs. They believed the money was ill-gotten and felt it would be a waste not to use it. Using the pin Su had secretly recorded earlier, they managed to steal a total of 4.73 million new Taiwan dollars, roughly equivalent to 134,000 US dollars. 2 days later, to ensure that the body wouldn't resurface, Su's father bought 2 diving suits and returned to the river. He dived down to check the state of the body and moved some rocks from the river bank to place on top of the body to weigh it down. Additionally, Lin Fu had prepared a sharp iron rod to stab the body. He later confessed, "At the time I was releasing the gas to prevent it from floating to the surface." In an even more bizarre twist, they even considered buying piranhas to release into the river to eat the body and destroy the evidence. After finishing their grim task, the family rushed home to try and return to normalcy. However, they had not anticipated how quickly and thoroughly the police would investigate. Through phone recordings, surveillance footage, and the comparison of various pieces of evidence, the police gradually pieced together the family's crime. On December 17, 2019, police raided the Lin family home, finding both the location where they had hidden incriminating items and physical evidence connected to the crime. During interrogation, the members of the Lin family slowly began to confess their involvement. They admitted their motives and the details of the murder. Ultimately, all 4 family members were arrested by the police and brought to trial. They were charged with murder, hiding the body, and other crimes. In court, they pled guilty and expressed remorse for their actions. This family had meticulously planned and carefully executed their crime, believing that everything they did was flawless. However, man proposes, God disposes. The Dongluo River had long been illegally filled with a large amount of debris, making it increasingly shallow. Combined with heavy rains over several days, the bloated corpse floated to the surface, and all of the Lin family's careful efforts were exposed to the world. This gruesome murder case involving an entire family is rare, with every member implicated. When the daughter Lin Shiyu became entangled with Zhang Kaijun in both a romantic and financial struggle, instead of stepping in to prevent further harm, her parents joined in on the plot, meticulously dividing tasks. The societal impact of such an incident, where a whole family is complicit in murder, is deeply troubling. Therefore, the Zhonghua District Prosecutor's Office recommended the judge impose a harsher sentence. However, the judge noted that while Lin Shiyu only intended to steal the money, her inability to properly handle the relationship made her an accomplice to the murder. All the family members acted with the intent to harm Zhang Kaijun, driven by their belief that Zhang had mistreated Shiyu. Their actions stemmed from selfish desires, different from cold-blooded killers. Moreover, given that the family ultimately confessed to their crimes, their remorse was taken into account during sentencing. As a result, Lin Fu, Shiyu's mother, and Shiyu's brother were sentenced to 16 to 17 years in prison, while Shiyu herself received a life sentence. The money they had stolen from the victim, all ill-gotten gains, was confiscated. This was a fitting punishment for this murderous family. On March 16, 2018, two men arrived at the Guanghua Precinct Police Station in New Taipei City, Taiwan, to report a case. The first person informed the police, "One of my female employees has been missing for several days, and I'm worried that something unfortunate may have happened to her." Shortly after, the missing woman's brother arrived, having been called by his sister's boss. During questioning, this pair left a strong impression on the police. The missing woman's brother seemed unusually calm, almost as if the situation didn't concern him, while her boss appeared far more worried. The missing woman's name was Yi Shufeng, 37 years old, and she worked as an accountant at a local factory. On March 14th, her boss noticed that Shufeng had not shown up to work for 2 days. She had been employed at the factory for 11 years, was well-liked, and known as a reliable worker. On a personal level, because her parents had passed away 3 years ago due to illness, she became very health-conscious. Shufeng often exercised after work and regularly participated in running events. On March 12th, she requested time off, stating she would attend a running event in Taitung. Her boss even reminded her that she could take an additional 2 days off if necessary. However, by March 15th, Shufeng still hadn't returned to work. Her boss thought, how could Shufeng take time off without a reason like this? This is highly unusual. Worried that something might have happened, he called her immediately. The troubling part was that he couldn't reach Shufeng. That evening, he went directly to her house to check on her. Shufeng lived with her brother's family after their parents passed away. Her brother, Yi Jixiang, answered the door. Facing the concerned boss, Jixiang seemed indifferent, simply saying, "My sister isn't home, and I've called her more than 20 times, but she hasn't answered." With that response, the boss had no choice but to leave. On March 16th, a representative from the running association called Shufeng's boss, saying, Yi Shufeng didn't participate in the event at all. Normally, Shufeng always completed her assigned tasks. But this time, she had been missing for 4 days, leading to the situation where 2 people reported her missing. Usually, if someone goes missing, their family members are the ones most concerned. But Jixiang didn't seem worried at all. When questioned by the police, he casually responded, "For an adult like her, what could possibly happen, right?" The police asked, "Did you check your sister's room?" He responded, "The door to my sister's room was locked, and I don't have a key, so I've never been inside." Upon hearing this, the police immediately thought, what if she was sick in the room, or something had happened in there? So Jixiang invited a locksmith to check inside. That way, even if no one was in the room, they could search for other clues. When the door opened, no one was inside, but an odd smell filled the air. So what was the issue? Jixiang noticed that his sister's bed, which had been in the corner of the room, was now pushed to the center, and the corner was piled with clothes. As he moved closer and picked up his sister's belongings, something strange began to emerge. Beneath the pile of clothes, to everyone's surprise, was a cement bag covering a newly repaved area. This strange scene sent chills down everyone's spines. Could Shufeng really be under this cement? The police questioned Jixiang and his wife, asking, "There's a spot like this in your sister's room. Did either of you know about it?" Both denied knowing anything. The police continued, "Has your sister been doing any work in the room recently?" Again, both said they didn't know. From the initial observation, the cement had not fully dried, indicating that it had been poured recently. It was shocking that such a place existed in the house, and yet the brother and sister-in-law claimed they knew nothing about it. The case became even more suspicious. Upon further investigation, there were no signs of forced entry, and no property had been stolen. Moreover, surveillance footage showed that since March 12th, after Su Feng returned home on her scooter, she hadn't left the house. As police entered the home, they noticed the room was immaculately clean, unlike the typical condition of a house with 2 young children. Additionally, there were charms stuck on the front door and the bedroom door. In Su Feng's room, a meat grinder had recently been used, and there were traces of fresh vegetable oil. Considering all these factors, the police believed that Shufeng had been murdered, and the prime suspects were her brother, Ji Xiang, and her sister-in-law, Zhang Fengxin. Meanwhile, Shufeng's friends had contacted the police, concerned about her disappearance, and provided information about their daily conversations with her. This directly led to increased suspicion of her sister-in-law, Fengxin. From these conversations, it became clear that Shifeng frequently mentioned conflicts with her sister-in-law. On March 11th, the day before she disappeared, she posted on social media, "Someone wants to stab me with a knife. Should I call the police?" The person she referred to was Fengxin. Thus, Fengxin became the prime suspect in the case. Fengxin, 38, was originally from Kaohsiung, Taiwan. At 18, she married Shifeng's brother's classmate, but the marriage only lasted 3 years before ending due to her ex-husband's infidelity. Afterward, she moved to Taipei and worked with a colleague at the time, who also happened to be Shifeng's brother, Jixiang. In 2003, before they were married, she moved into Jixiang's family home. At that time, the house was shared with Jixiang's parents and siblings. After living together for some time, they eventually got married and had children. This house was purchased by Jixiang's parents and registered under the names of the 3 siblings. Initially, everyone got along, but soon conflicts began to arise within the family. Zhang Fengxin and her sister-in-law often argued and had loud disputes. Eventually, even Jixiang's younger brother couldn't tolerate it and moved out. Neighbors described Shifeng as friendly and approachable, always greeting those around her warmly. Fengxin, on the other hand, had a cold demeanor. Even when others greeted her in a friendly manner, she wouldn't respond. When her mother-in-law was alive, she often complained about her daughter-in-law's poor attitude, saying she was overly perfectionistic. While Jixiang spent his days collecting scrap materials, his wife would stay at home, cooking only for herself, completely disregarding her mother-in-law and sister-in-law as family. During the police interrogation, Fengxin remained very calm. She even asked, seeing that the suspect was strong-willed. The officers began using softer tactics during the questioning. It wasn't until her children arrived that tears welled up in Fengxin's eyes. The police seized the opportunity and, with empathetic words, tried to persuade her to confess early, suggesting it would lead to a lighter sentence and allow her to see her children sooner. These words finally broke her resistance, and Fengxin admitted her intent was to ensure Shifeng would never see the sunlight again. She added, however, her husband, Jixiang, had no knowledge of this. It was now confirmed that Shifeng's body was buried in the concrete grave. The police immediately called the funeral home to prepare to open the concrete and recover the body. However, the process that day did not go smoothly because neither the forensic doctors nor the funeral staff had encountered such a situation before. They were concerned that hitting the concrete too hard could damage the body. After chiseling for half a day, they had only managed to break a small portion. Since it was already early morning, they decided to continue the work the following day. The next morning, after lighting incense to show respect for the deceased, the rescue team resumed chiseling. This time, they brought in an electric drill, and everything went much more smoothly. Once the concrete tomb was fully broken, a heartbreaking sight emerged. Yi Shifeng's body was wrapped in layers of towels, bedsheets, and secured with tape. The corpse had already begun to decompose, and there was a visible wound on her head. Everything at the scene raised more questions for the police. Could this really have been carried out by a woman like Feng Xian? Creating a concrete tomb approximately 39 inches deep and about 12 inches wide would be a difficult task, even for a grown man, and would leave a mess of dust and debris in the house. Was Jixiang truly innocent in all this? From the time his sister went missing until she was found, Jixiang had always displayed an aloof and calm demeanor, as if he knew everything all along. Although Feng Xian confessed to the crime before the concrete tomb was broken, any family member would hope that what was inside was not their sibling. However, Jixiang showed no sorrow. Instead, he was already inquiring with the funeral home staff about how to handle the post-funeral arrangements to save money. During the chiseling process, he remained calm, even sitting down to eat breakfast in the hallway. The police saw Jixiang pacing back and forth and approached him, advising him not to worry too much. Unexpectedly, he responded, "What if this house becomes a crime scene?" This strange remark shocked everyone present and raised suspicions among the police that Jixiang might be involved in the case. Shortly after, the police investigated Jixiang's actions in the days following the crime. They found that Zhang Fengxin had purchased concrete 3 times in a row by herself, while Jixiang was at work during the time of the crime. This meant he was not present when Shifeng was killed. In the end, the police cleared Jixiang of suspicion, but whether or not he knew about the crime remains a big question. Some media outlets reported that Fengxian's daughter hesitated, and told the police that her father had entered her aunt's room, which was Shifeng's room. If this was true, given the small size of the room, it would be hard not to notice something unusual upon entering. However, the police couldn't determine the exact time when the father entered the sister's room, so the matter was not investigated further. But after living in the family for 15 years, why would Fang Qian want Shifeng dead? The investigation revealed two primary factors: a dispute over the ownership of the house and conflicts in their daily lives. As mentioned earlier, the house was registered under the names of the three siblings. However, Ji Xiang's job as a security guard earned him only 9,000 yuan per month, and he initially contributed only 1,000 yuan to the household expenses. Later, after being reminded by his brother-in-law, he increased his contribution by another 1,000 yuan, which included daily living expenses for their two children. Fang Qian said that his lunch cost only 7 yuan, equivalent to about $1, and their financial struggles forced him to take on extra work as a janitor and a laborer assisting others. This made it nearly impossible for him to pay off the house debt, let alone own a home of his own. Fang Qian had mentioned moving out, but her husband always brushed it off, saying, "Let's wait until the kids are a bit older." Faced with this situation, Ji Xiang was determined to hold his ground. He believed that the family property should be passed down to the sons, and that as the sister, Shifeng should move out. Among the three siblings, the younger brother, Yi Miaoxiu, was in a slightly better financial position. He had been working since he was 18 and had already moved out. Because of Ji Xiang's low income, Yi Shifeng had to take on the responsibility of paying off the house debt. To make ends meet, she didn't even have time to date. Eventually, Shifeng was also registered as a co-owner of the house. Although she didn't have a good relationship with her sister-in-law, and her friends often advised her to move out, she still wanted to hold on to the house. First, because she was the one paying off the mortgage, and second, the house represented the love and memories of her parents. Shifeng didn't want to give up those memories. Moreover, she didn't want the house to be taken over by someone else. There were also smaller conflicts in their daily lives. On October 26, 2017, Shifeng posted a message on social media. "I see them in the morning, and I see them again at night. I don't even need to sleep anymore." From the comments and interactions with friends on the platform, it was clear that she was complaining about her sister-in-law deliberately slamming the refrigerator door or the toilet lid loudly while she was sleeping. To avoid direct conflict with her sister-in-law, she left a note on the refrigerator door that read, "Please close the door quietly. Thank you for your cooperation." However, this note didn't solve the problem and only escalated the conflict. Fang Xian confronted Su Feng directly, argued with her, and even pushed her down. These altercations didn't happen just once. As the tensions grew, Fang Xian even threatened to stab someone with a knife, and the police did not rule out the possibility that she did this to force Su Feng to surrender and voluntarily move out. The story became even more complicated when Zhang Fang Xian accused Su Feng of having an inappropriate relationship with her brother. The reason was that, one time, their 8-year-old daughter saw her father enter his sister's room after drinking. From then on, whenever she saw her husband in Shifeng's room, she suspected that they were either engaged in an improper relationship or talking badly about her. Shifeng complained to her friends about these accusations, saying, "My sister-in-law is a crazy woman." In reality, this was the point when Shifeng found herself in real danger. She had told her brother, Ji Xiang, about these issues, but he chose not to confront the family conflict. Instead, he either avoided the situation or tried to smooth things over. Before the incident occurred, Fang Xian had even threatened to stab her sister-in-law, and Su Feng had considered going to the police. To prevent things from getting worse, Ji Xiang agreed that his family would move out the following year. Unfortunately, this decision came too late, and Yi Su Feng did not live to see that day. In addition to complaining to her brother, Su Feng had made several phone calls to Fang Xian's family, complaining about the inconveniences caused by her sister-in-law. She confided in friends that even when their mother was alive, she had to call Fang Xian's family because she was insulted and ridiculed by her daughter-in-law. Fang Xian had divorced her previous husband due to his infidelity, so she was highly protective of her current family and wanted to maintain the image of a happy marriage in front of her parents. The phone calls from her sister-in-law made her feel deeply ashamed, and this was the final straw. On the morning of March 13th, after dropping her children off at school, Fang Xian received a call from her family and learned that her sister-in-law had complained again. Shufeng had scolded Fang Xian's father, saying, "You need to control your daughter, or I'll kick her out." This enraged Fang Xian, and she told her father and brother that she wanted to go home and kill her. At the time, they thought it was just an outburst of anger and didn't take it seriously. After returning home, Shufeng was preparing to go to work. Earlier, she had taken a photo of the bruise on her right shoulder, caused by being shoved by her sister-in-law, and sent it to her friends, mentioning it still hurt a little. That would be her last message. After coming out of the bathroom, her sister-in-law Zhang Fang Xian stood at the front door, and the two began arguing as soon as they saw each other. Fang Xian, using her stronger physique, overpowered Su Feng and tried to wrap tape around her head. These rolls of tape had been prepared in advance, with the intent of using them to kill Su Feng, but previously, because her children were present, Feng Xian had held back. However, in her panic, Shufeng bit Feng Xian's hand. This only fueled Feng Xian's anger, and she grabbed a nearby dumbbell and struck Shufeng hard. The blow to her head caused Shufeng immense pain, and she began vomiting, pleading with her sister-in-law to stop. But this did not stir any sympathy in Feng Xian, who coldly replied, "It's too late for apologies now, sister." Feng Xian then continued beating her until Shufeng went silent. Fang Xian's body was covered in blood at this point, so she went to the bathroom, filled the tub with water, and washed the blood off herself before returning to the living room. When she heard that Shufeng was still breathing, instead of saving her, Fang Xian furiously dragged her into the bathroom and submerged her head in the tub until she stopped breathing completely. After all that, Fang Xian began thinking about how to deal with the body. She recalled a Hong Kong movie she had seen earlier. Using cement to seal a body appeared to help mask the smell. So she rode her scooter to buy 15 bags of cement, each weighing about 9 pounds, but that wasn't nearly enough to cover the body. Over the next 2 days, while her husband was at work and her children were at school, she went to 3 hardware stores and bought 21 more bags of cement to complete the task. Notably, the money to buy the cement was taken from Yi Shifeng's savings jar, because Fang Xian believed that the expenses for the cement, which she considered part of Su Feng's burial, should be paid with Su Feng's own money. It was clear that after Yi Su Feng's death, Fang Xian felt no remorse or sorrow. Her heart was filled with hatred and jealousy. Not long after, Yi Jixiang and his children moved out of the house. By August 2018, the house was sold at half the market price. In the end, the new Taipei City Criminal Court sentenced Zhang Fang Xian to death for premeditated murder. In January 2019, the appeal court upheld the original sentence. It was a well-deserved punishment for the cruel actions of this sister-in-law. It also serves as a valuable lesson in how we handle relationships when living together. Story 3. The case took place in Nanjing, Jiangsu Province, China. On the afternoon of February 28, 2011, 2 college students were hiking on Mount Jiangjun. They were familiar with the small trails on this mountain. That day, they chose a narrow path to climb to the summit. As they reached the middle of the mountain, they suddenly smelled a strong, foul odor. Ahead, in the bushes, they vaguely saw several bags. Both felt very frustrated, wondering who could be so inconsiderate as to litter and even go through the trouble of carrying trash halfway up the mountain to dump it. They wondered if this litter bug had too much free time on their hands. Out of curiosity, the two approached to take a closer look. When they opened the bags, they were met with a horrifying sight. Instead of trash, they found decomposing body parts. Trembling with fear, they immediately called the police. Upon receiving the report, the police quickly arrived and immediately cordoned off the scene. After careful inspection and counting, they discovered a total of 11 bags containing body parts nearby. After thorough examination, the forensic team was able to reassemble a complete male body. The victim was estimated to be between 40 and 50 years old, slightly overweight and quite muscular. The skull was fractured, clearly indicating death by blunt force trauma. The face was severely damaged. The time of death was estimated to be about 2 to 3 days prior. The forensic experts also discovered that the perpetrator had a skilled technique with some knowledge of human anatomy. The cuts were all made at weak points. Therefore, they speculated that the killer was likely to be a doctor, butcher, or police officer. No murder weapon or blood stains were found at the scene, and there were no signs of struggle in the surrounding area. Thus, this was certainly not the primary crime scene, but merely a dump site. The victim's body parts were placed in black garbage bags tied with plastic cords. Due to rain 2 days earlier, footprints and fingerprints at the scene were no longer identifiable. So who was the victim? The police quickly reviewed missing person reports, hoping to find clues about the victim's identity. However, all efforts were in vain. They only received one report of a missing child, who was found a few hours later. In the following week, there were reports of missing elderly women, but most had either gotten lost or run away from home. There were no missing middle-aged men. Could it be that someone from another region came to Nanjing to dispose of a body after committing murder? The veteran police officers in Nanjing believed this was impossible. Mount Jiangjun is not a famous landmark, but a small mountain covering an area of about 1.35 square miles. Even many local Nanjing residents couldn't locate Mount Jiangjun. Moreover, the path where the perpetrator dumped the body was quite remote. If someone hadn't been there before, it would be difficult to find the way, let alone dump a body. Furthermore, if an outsider came to Nanjing to dispose of a body, why not dump it in more remote rural areas, or on barren hills near the urban-rural fringe, rather than on Mount Jiangjun, which is close to universities and residential areas? This would be extremely easy to discover. Most police officers believed that the killer was a local Nanjing resident. However, it was difficult to determine whether the deceased was also a local. The top priority was to identify the victim as soon as possible. However, the victim's face was also severely damaged, making identification impossible. The Nanjing police invited experts from the Jiangsu Provincial Public Security Bureau to reconstruct the skull in an attempt to restore the deceased's appearance. But even though the experts tried to reconstruct the face from the skull, many important details were still missing. The investigation seemed to have hit a dead end, giving the investigators a headache. At this moment, an unexpected discovery opened up a new direction. During a meticulous examination, the forensic team discovered a small but extremely important detail on the victim's body that had been previously overlooked. On the victim's underwear, there was a sophisticated secret pocket, cleverly disguised as a label. This pocket was so intricate that even the naked eye could hardly detect it. Inside the secret pocket, experts found a small, crumpled piece of paper soaked in blood. At first glance, this piece of paper seemed unremarkable. However, it became the key that opened a breakthrough in the investigation. The police quickly used modern technology to restore this small piece of paper. They were delighted to discover it was a train ticket fragment. It showed a journey from Lanzhou to Nanjing on February 25, 2011, with the seat number clearly visible. Since train tickets had started implementing a real name registration system, the police quickly traced the name of the ticket buyer. Through a household registration investigation, this person was identified as Tian Mingyang, approximately 40 years old, from Lanzhou. When compared with the photo reconstructed from the skull earlier, the police found that he closely resembled the victim. It seemed that the identity issue had been resolved. After that, the police immediately formed a special task force to go to Lanzhou, directly to Mingyang's home. However, Mingyang's wife seemed very surprised by the police's questions. She said her husband was at work. How could he be missing? The police hurriedly went to Tian Mingyang's company to confirm, only to find him alive and working normally. So why did his train ticket appear on the victim's body? Faced with the police's questions, Mingyang appeared very shocked. He explained that he had indeed bought a train ticket to Nanjing. At that time, he was visiting his second sister-in-law, Shui Laiping, and his niece. His second older brother had died in a car accident 5 years ago, and his sister-in-law was raising their child alone in Nanjing. He had a good relationship with his sister-in-law and loved his niece very much, so he often visited them. As for the train ticket, he had either thrown it away or it might have been picked up by someone else. The task force immediately investigated Mingyang's statement. According to the forensic examination, the victim's time of death was late on the night of the 25th. The police checked the surveillance cameras of the hotel where Tian Mingyang stayed and found that he had returned to his room on the afternoon of the 25th, then went for a bath and massage at the hotel, and then to a bar to watch soccer until 2 a.m. before returning to his room to rest. Early the next morning he left the hotel, took a bus to the airport, and flew back to Lanzhou. It seemed that Mingyang was indeed not the killer, but it was very strange why the victim would pick up this train ticket and put it in a secret pocket. Logically, keeping a train ticket in such a discreet place suggests it was something very important. Or was it not the victim who put it there, but the killer deliberately doing so to mislead the police? Once again, the case reached a dead end. Fortunately, The police officer in charge of tracing evidence quickly found a new lead. Previously, according to the forensic examination, the murder weapons could have been an axe and a cleaver. These two items were very common and difficult to trace, but the plastic bags containing the body provided a good clue. Through analysis, these plastic bags came from the Metro supermarket in Jiangning District, Nanjing. Subsequently, the task force reviewed the supermarket surveillance footage for the 15 days before the crime, filtering out those who bought axes, cleavers, and garbage bags. However, the number of such people was very high, making it difficult to identify the killer from this information. At this point, Ming Yang had become uncooperative, making excuses that he and the victim had no relationship. However, the criminal investigators noticed that he seemed very anxious, constantly making phone calls and saying something excitedly. Based on their professional instincts, the police believed that the case must be related to the Tian family. Therefore, they approached an acquaintance of the Tian family, asking him to help review the surveillance footage to see if any of the suspects were related to Ming Yang. Unexpectedly, after watching for less than 15 minutes, there was a major discovery. This acquaintance immediately recognized that one of the suspicious buyers on February 24th was Mr. Xue Jingong, the father-in-law of Ming Yang's deceased second older brother. This man was over 70 years old and a well-known businessman in Nanjing. On that day, he had bought an axe, a cleaver, and many garbage bags at the supermarket. It seemed that Mr. Xue and Ming Yang must be involved in this case. However, based solely on the surveillance video, nothing could be concluded. It wasn't even enough to summon Mr. Xue for questioning. At this point, the forensic experts had reconstructed the victim's face multiple times, and the more they looked, the more it resembled Ming Yang. Could it be that he and Mr. Xue had together killed a relative of the Tian family? From this breakthrough, the police quickly conducted a thorough investigation into the Tian family members. The family had 2 sisters and 3 brothers in total. The eldest brother was Tian Mingqing, the second brother was Tian Mingguang, and the youngest was Tian Mingyang. These 3 brothers looked very similar, while other relatives didn't resemble them much. Currently, besides Mingyang living in Lanzhou, the eldest brother Mingqing had died in a car accident 5 years ago, and the second brother had mysteriously disappeared after that accident. The family had explained that Mingguang, overwhelmed with grief over his brother's death, had gone to Shenzhen alone to start a business. He hadn't returned home in all these years. Could the victim be Tian Mingguang? The police simultaneously extracted surveillance footage from the train station and the apartment complex of Ming Yang's sister-in-law, Xu Liping. They discovered that on that day, besides Ming Yang, there was always a rather chubby man accompanying him. The two entered Liping's home together, but afterwards, only Ming Yang came out alone. A few hours later, suddenly 4 men burst into Liping's home, then carried out a large sack, threw it into an Audi parked outside, and quickly drove away. Although the man accompanying Ming Yang had deliberately avoided cameras throughout the process, he still left some angles captured. Compared with the reconstructed face of the victim, the police believed this man was Tian Mingguang. The person later stuffed into the sack was probably him too. At this point, the police speculated that perhaps Ming Yang had killed his brother Mingguang together with his sister-in-law, and her father, Mr. Xue, was responsible for buying the murder weapons for them. The motive for the crime still needed further investigation. Therefore, the police quickly took DNA samples from Mingguang's son for comparison. However, the results surprised everyone. The victim was not Mingguang, but the victim's DNA had a very high similarity with Mingguang's son's DNA. This truly puzzled everyone. The victim wasn't Mingguang, but he was certainly a relative of his. Therefore, the police took DNA samples from all members of the Tian family to compare with the victim. This time, they finally discovered the true identity of the victim, but the result shocked everyone to their core. No one expected that the victim would turn out to be the eldest brother, Tian Mingqing, who had supposedly died in a car accident 5 years ago. What was going on here? Could the dead come back to life? Tian Mingqing's car accident 5 years ago still had complete documentation, and even a Japanese insurance company had paid out compensation. So how could a person die twice? Just as everyone was confused about what to do, Ming Yang suddenly confessed the truth to the police. He said that the victim was indeed the eldest brother, Ming Qing, while the person who died in the car accident 5 years ago was actually the second brother, Ming Guang. What was the story behind this seemingly unbelievable tale? Tian Mingqing was born in 1962 into a large family in a poor rural area of Lanzhou. Despite the family's difficult circumstances, he showed exceptional intelligence early on, determined to find opportunities to change his fate. After abandoning farming, he boldly ventured into business, gradually improving his life significantly. In the early 1980s, riding the wave of overseas migration, Mingqing set foot in Japan with dreams of a better life. After a decade of relentless struggle, he not only established himself in a foreign land, but also built a career, becoming a small business owner. During this time, Mingqing married a Japanese woman of Chinese descent and had 2 children with her. To facilitate his life and career, he decided to naturalize as a Japanese citizen, changing his name to Tanaka Mingqing. However, this marriage didn't last long. After the divorce, custody of the 2 children was given to his ex-wife. After naturalization, Mingqing's career became even more successful. He quickly opened his own health food company. In April 1999, while touring Mount Fuji, Mingqing met Shui Liping, a female international student. She was 8 years younger than him from Nanjing, and born into a family of high-ranking officials. Her father was a hospital official, and her mother was a chief physician. Liping, heartbroken from a failed relationship, had decided to go to Japan to study beauty therapy, hoping to heal her emotional wounds. Fate brought her to meet Tian Mingqing during a tour. Their conversation was incredibly harmonious, leaving a deep impression on both of them. Coincidentally, a few months later, they met again at a health food fair. Attracted by Liping's beauty and grace, Mingqing began to pursue her. Love quickly blossomed between them. By January 2001, they had officially married. After marriage, Liping also naturalized as a Japanese citizen and changed her name to Tanaka Liping, marking a new beginning in her life. Their happiness was made complete when a year later, they welcomed the birth of their little daughter. However, life isn't always smooth sailing. At this time, Mingqing's business began to face difficulties. The Japanese economy was in recession, coupled with fierce competition from rivals, causing his company to struggle increasingly. Financial pressure weighed heavily on the young couple, leading to frequent arguments. Subsequently, Liping returned to China with their daughter and started her own business, opening a beauty salon in Nanjing. During this time, she reunited with her ex-boyfriend, Tang Kai. Tang Kai was also in the beauty industry and was very helpful in assisting Liping with her startup. Gradually, their old feelings reignited. But having a family, Liping had to maintain an appropriate distance from Tang Kai. Meanwhile, Mingqing remained alone in Japan, trying to keep his business afloat. By 2006, his company was drowning in debt, on the brink of bankruptcy. Unable to hold on any longer, he decided to return to China to raise capital. Previously, while still in Japan, Mingqing had purchased an accident insurance policy worth 200 million yen, approximately $1.8 million. Shortly after his return to China, in August 2006, he died in a car accident. Regarding this mysterious car accident, Liping recounted, after returning to China, Mingqing went to his hometown in Lanzhou to borrow money. He had arranged to meet his brother, Mingguang. After greeting each other, he explained his purpose of borrowing money. Mingguang agreed immediately. At this time, Liping discovered their daughter had diarrhea, so she called Mingqing. Upon hearing this, Mingqing was very worried about his daughter, so his brother told him to go to Nanjing first, and he would send the money later when he had gathered enough. Mingqing hurried to the airport, leaving his brother to drive his car back for him. In his haste, he left his phone, wallet, and personal belongings in the car. Half an hour later, as Mingguang was driving his brother's car on the highway, the car suddenly burst into intense flames, quickly burning the person inside to charcoal. The traffic police, based on the phone, driver's license, and other items found at the scene matching the car owner's information, concluded that the person burned to death was Mingqing. They quickly notified Liping of the sad news and issued an accident certificate. Upon receiving the tragic news, Liping cried uncontrollably. But unexpectedly, a few hours later, Tian Mingqing opened the door and walked into the house. Liping panicked, asked, "Aren't you dead?" Mingqing, bewildered, replied, "What are you talking about?" Only then did Liping recount the events to her husband. Upon hearing this, Mingqing realized that his brother Mingguang had died in the car accident, and he was overwhelmed with grief. At this point, the couple intended to tell the family the truth, but they suddenly remembered the large insurance policy they had purchased in Japan. If they let the misidentification stand and claimed the insurance money, they could overcome their current financial difficulties. Mingqing would only need to hide for a few years, then use fake documents, and the family of 3 could live happily together again. So the couple decided to take the risk. Afterwards, Liping arranged for Mingqing to temporarily stay at a hotel outside using his own documents. A few days later, he secretly went to Baoji City to hide under a false name. Out of fear, when identifying the body, he refused DNA testing, so the compensation documents were incomplete, and thus he didn't receive full compensation. In the following 6 months, he received over 5 million yuan, approximately $770,000, in compensation from the Japanese insurance company in 3 installments. However, the Nanjing police had some doubts about Liping's statement. Mingqing had an accident shortly after returning to the country. Coincidentally, he had also purchased a large insurance policy in Japan, and the car suddenly caught fire strangely with such large flames that the person inside had no chance to escape. Finally, it led to being burned alive. The strange thing was, no matter how rushed Mingqing was, how could he leave all his personal belongings in the car? Normally, people would at least carry their phone, right? And the story about their daughter having diarrhea, it wasn't a serious illness. Why the need to rush so much? The police speculated that it's very likely that he deliberately left these items behind to create a fake scene of his accident. This could very well be a carefully planned murder for insurance fraud by the couple. Mingqing and Liping, not hesitating to sacrifice the life of his own brother. But due to the carelessness of the examiner, once the body was cremated, all evidence was gone, and this case could no longer be investigated. After Mingqing's death, Liping naturally sold her husband's company in Japan and gave 2 million yuan, about $308,000, of the proceeds to her in-laws. She kept the 5 million yuan, about $770,000, insurance money for her own business. So Mingqing lived a life of hiding in Shaanxi and Hunan provinces. Meanwhile, Liping in Nanjing ran her beauty salon very successfully. With additional capital and the help of her lover, Liping's beauty salon business thrived, opening many branches. Making money, she also invested in her father's company, causing her father's business to develop rapidly as well. Not only was her work going well, but Liping's love life was also smooth sailing. Tang Kai, unaware of the truth, thought Liping's husband had died in an accident and began openly pursuing her. He was also very good to her daughter, taking care of her attentively, which moved Liping deeply. During the 3 years of Mingqing's absence, friends who didn't know the situation enthusiastically urged Liping to start a new romantic life. Reluctantly, she had to make her relationship with boyfriend Tang Kai public. So what about Mingqing? How had he been living? This dead man had no legal identity in society, had to hide every day, didn't dare to stay in large hotels, could only live in shabby inns and illegal rental rooms. Those places were also gathering spots for all sorts of people. Therefore, he made a secret pocket in his underwear where he could hide money in case of emergencies. Every day, he didn't dare to go out much, getting anxious whenever he saw police. Most of the time, he'd just lay on the bed watching TV in the rental room. His meals were mainly instant noodles. On the first anniversary of Mingguang's death, Mingqing went to Famen Temple in Baojia to light incense. Unexpectedly, he met an old classmate there. The friend, not knowing he was supposed to be dead, greeted him. At this moment, Mingqing pretended not to know him and hurriedly ran away. Afterwards, he packed his belongings and moved to a different place. Mingqing had lived anonymously like a sewer rat for 3 years, not daring to contact his wife proactively, mostly letting her contact him. During these years, knowing that his wife's business was growing, he was also very happy, hoping to end this kind of life soon so his wife could open a health food company for him. However, as time went on, he found his wife becoming increasingly cold, seemingly intentionally distancing herself from him. By Chinese New Year 2009, having not received a call from his wife for a long time, he couldn't resist calling her from a public phone. Unexpectedly, Liping made an excuse of being busy and hung up. This made Mingqing very angry. After careful consideration, he decided to end his life in hiding and return home to reunite with his wife and child. Until June 2009, just as Liping and her daughter arrived home and were about to open the door, Mingqing suddenly appeared from the hallway. Seeing her supposedly dead father appear, the daughter cried out in fear. Liping was also startled to see her husband in shabby clothes. Although the couple had initially conspired together to defraud the insurance, Liping now had a new love and was even planning to marry. Fortunately, Tang Kai was away on a business trip recently. She had to think of a way to get rid of Ming Qing. When Ming Qing saw the luxurious apartment and his lovely wife and daughter, he couldn't help but exclaim, "It's so good to be home." That night, he tried to embrace his wife intimately, but Liping refused, using the excuse of not wanting to wake their daughter. At this point, Ming Qing thought, perhaps because they had been apart for too long, his wife wasn't used to it yet, so he didn't force her and had to sleep in the living room. A few days later, Liping took their daughter to her parents' home. The innocent child blurted out that her father had returned. This greatly surprised Mr. Su. After questioning, she had to tell her father the whole story. Upon learning the truth, Mr. Su scolded his daughter for being reckless, saying she shouldn't have been involved in such illegal activities. But at this point, saying those things was no longer helpful. Mingqing was rejected by his wife every night with various excuses. One night, Liping deliberately stayed out until midnight, only to find her husband still waiting for her. He ignored her protests and forced himself on her. At this point, Liping had feelings for someone else, so she felt extremely distressed. With no other choice, she had to ask her father for help. By then, Mr. Su had assets worth tens of millions of yuan, millions of dollars, and he thought only money could drive him away. So the next day, Liping gave her husband a bank card with 3 million yuan, about $462,000, saying this was the insurance compensation, the part he deserved. She told him to take this money and start a new life, and that she would take good care of their daughter. Faced with this action from his wife, Mingqing slapped her, questioning if she had another man. Liping could only cry and beg for her husband's forgiveness. At this moment, Mingqing understood that he had become redundant and could no longer live in this family. Reluctantly, he took the money and left, his heart full of resentment. But the matter didn't end there. The more Mingqing thought about it, the angrier he became. He thought, "I risked so much, lived in hiding for years just so the whole family could have a good life. Now my wife and child are indeed living well, but I've fallen into this situation. Now they give me 3 million to drive me away. It's really unfair." Feeling betrayed and hurt, Mingqing decided to live recklessly, indulging in a life of debauchery. In just 2 short years, he had spent all 3 million yuan. When his pockets were empty, instead of coming to his senses, he turned to blackmailing Liping. In trying to meet her ex-husband's unreasonable demands, Liping gradually fell into difficult circumstances. Her beauty salon faced severe cash flow shortages on the verge of bankruptcy. Even her father's company was affected, falling into a precarious financial situation. But Mingqing was like a bottomless pit. No matter how hard Liping tried, she couldn't satisfy his unreasonable demands. In desperation, Liping had to arrange to meet him, begging him to stop. However, Tian Mingqing's answer made her even more desperate. He declared that he didn't need money anymore, but in exchange, he would return to reunite with the family. Not only that, Mingqing followed Liping home and discovered Tang Kai picking up his daughter from school. He took this opportunity to tell Tang Kai everything, wanting him to stay away from Liping. But unexpectedly, after hearing Liping and her father's explanation, Tang Kai not only forgave their deception, but also said he wouldn't leave Liping. Unable to achieve his wishes, Mingqing thought about seeking help. He returned to his hometown and told the whole story to his family. When they saw their eldest brother, who they thought had been long dead, the whole family was overjoyed. Seeing that his brother wanted to reconcile with his family, the youngest brother Mingyang said he would go with him to meet their second sister-in-law to mediate. He remembered that his sister-in-law used to be very fond of him. He even called Liping, saying that he would come with his eldest brother on the 25th, so everyone could talk. But when Liping received the call, she was completely distraught. She begged them not to disturb her life anymore. Mingqing, who was beside her, overheard this and grabbed the phone, saying that he must return to this family or else he would reveal the insurance fraud. With no other choice, Liping had to tell her father and boyfriend about the phone call. At this point, there was no turning back. Seeing his daughter being bullied like this, Mr. Shi decided to help her get rid of Mingqing. In his eyes, Mingqing had been dead for a long time. As long as the body couldn't be identified, no one would know it was him. And he himself was over 70 years old. Risking his life for his daughter was worth it. But thinking about his advanced age, he asked Tang Kai to find some thugs to kidnap Mingqing, saying he wanted to teach him a lesson. Then Mr. Shui went to the supermarket to buy an axe, a cleaver, and garbage bags, hiding them in the villa to wait for Mingqing's arrival. On that day, as agreed, the 2 brothers Mingqing and Mingyang came to Li Ping's house to negotiate. They argued until evening without reaching a conclusion. Ming Yang, feeling that this was a marital issue and he shouldn't interfere anymore, returned to his hotel first. Not long after he left, Tang Kai brought people to tie up Mingqin and take him to Mr. Shue's villa. After Tang Kai and his people left, Mr. Shue told his daughter to go home, saying he would handle the rest. At this point, Mingqing also sensed the old man's intention to kill him. He begged, but to no avail. So he made an excuse to go to the bathroom, then tucked the train ticket of his brother into the secret pocket in his underwear, hoping that the police could use this ticket to identify him later. At around 8 p.m., Mr. Su killed Mingqing with an axe, then used his medical knowledge to dismember the body. Initially, he planned to dispose of the body parts in a more distant location, but by the time he finished, it was already 2 a.m. He had to dispose of the body before daybreak, so he had to dump the bags containing the body parts on Mount Jiangjun, just a few hundred meters away from the villa. Afterwards, to prevent Mingyong from becoming suspicious, he impersonated Mingqing and sent a text message to Mingyong, saying he had gone to Hunan, and there was no need to look for him anymore. Therefore, when the police initially investigated, Mingyong didn't tell the truth, mainly because he was afraid his eldest brother would be arrested and sent to prison. After hearing that the victim was actually his eldest brother, he realized something was wrong and hurriedly confessed everything. The police later found a lot of Ming Cheng's blood in Mr. Su's villa and car. He also confessed to killing his son-in-law. Subsequently, the police also arrested Lai Ping as she was preparing to flee to Japan. Tang Kai also turned himself in to the police, admitting to the kidnapping, but not participating in the murder. In 2013, the court sentenced Mr. Su for intentional homicide, giving him a death sentence with a 2-year reprieve and life deprivation of political rights. Xue Liping was convicted of being an accomplice to murder and sentenced to life imprisonment, later reduced to 15 years in prison. Tang Kai and several other involved individuals were convicted of kidnapping with various sentences. With this, the bizarre and complex case was finally solved. As this case closed, we can't help but be shocked by the unexpected turns of life. From a simple fraud plan, the situation escalated into a bloody tragedy. This case serves as a mirror reflecting the dark sides of greed, selfishness, and how people can lose their humanity when pushed into a corner. But at the same time, it's also a warning about the power of justice and truth. No matter how long they are buried, the truth will eventually be revealed and justice will be served. Story for the story takes place in Kowloon, the geographic center of Hong Kong. Areas like Tsim Sha Tsui and Yau Ma Ti in Kowloon are well-known bustling areas, attracting tourists with a variety of shopping, dining, entertainment, and cultural activities. However, few people know that hidden behind this urban prosperity, in an apartment on one of Kowloon's busiest streets, a gruesome and mysterious murder once occurred. On Monday, May 24, 1999, as Hong Kong entered the final days of May with hot weather and sudden rains, 2 women, one older and one younger, appeared at the Kowloon police station. The older woman was a social worker from an orphanage called the Boat Quay Women's Shelter near Kowloon Pier. This facility, run by the Social Welfare Department, provides temporary housing and support services for girls in need of protection or undocumented immigrants awaiting processing. Standing next to the social worker was a 13-year-old girl named Afong. According to the social worker, Afong had been displaying unusual behavior recently. She frequently had nightmares, waking up in a state of panic and mumbling about seeing a headless woman. This woman kept demanding her lost head back. At first, the social worker thought Afong was just having typical nightmares. However, the fact that the girl kept dreaming the same dream raised suspicions. The social worker decided to arrange psychological counseling for Afong, and to everyone's shock, a horrifying crime was uncovered. 13-year-old Afong had a boyfriend named Liang Wailuan, a 19-year-old street thug. 2 months earlier, in March 1999, Wailuan had taken Afong out of the Boat Quay Women's Shelter to live with him. Their new residence was an old rundown apartment. It was there that Afong met 2 other men, friends of Wailuan. Additionally, Afong saw a disheveled woman with messy hair and ragged clothing. According to Wailuan, the woman had been kidnapped by the 3 men. Afong didn't know who the woman was and was too scared to ask questions. During her time in the apartment, Afong witnessed her boyfriend and his 2 friends repeatedly torturing and beating the woman. They even forced Afong to participate in the abuse by pouring chili oil on the woman's wounds and forcing her to eat her own waste. Terrified by these horrifying scenes, Afong didn't dare to disobey their orders and was forced to comply. 1 month later, unable to endure the brutal attacks any longer, the poor woman passed away. To cover up their crime, the three perpetrators became even more frenzied. They dismembered the victim's body into several parts and cooked them. They even forced Afong to put some of the cooked body parts into bowls of noodles to make a delicacy for them. Having experienced these horrifying events, Afong suffered severe psychological trauma. She became mentally numb in a constant state of panic and repeatedly saw the dead woman demanding her lost head back. Due to Afong's strange behavior, Wailuan grew tired of her and decided to break up, throwing her out of the apartment. With nowhere else to go, Afong was forced to return to the Boat Key Women's Shelter. In the following days, Afong frequently had nightmares and her health rapidly declined. Her deteriorating condition caught the attention of the social worker at the shelter, who quickly took Afong to the police station to report the situation. The police immediately began questioning Afong. However, due to her unstable mental state, she couldn't continue and the police had to temporarily stop the interrogation. 2 days later, Afong returned to the station to cooperate with the investigation. This time, her mental state had improved significantly. Afong revealed that the victim's name was Fan Manny, 23 years old, and that she had worked as a bar hostess. The three perpetrators who abused her were Afong's boyfriend, Wailuan, 19 years old, along with his 2 friends, Chan Manlok, 33, and Liang Xingchao, 26. Afong testified that after brutally killing Manny, the 3 men dismembered her body. When she reached this point in her story, Afong's face showed horror and she couldn't continue speaking. With the police's guidance, Afong shakily provided an address, 31 Granville Road, Sim Shasway. With this lead, the police immediately dispatched officers to the provided address. It was an old 5-story apartment building, including a basement and 4 upper floors. Afong indicated that the crime took place in an apartment on the 3rd floor. Previously, she and her boyfriend had lived in the apartment across the hall. The police planned to bring Afong to the crime scene to assist in the investigation, but she was in a state of shock, her face pale, and she refused to go any further. Afong was kept downstairs while several officers proceeded upstairs to investigate. They made their way up the dark staircase, dimly lit by a single light bulb. Before long, they reached the apartment on the 3rd floor. The officers knocked, but no one answered. Finally, they decided to break down the door. A strong stench immediately hit their noses. As experienced officers, they quickly recognized the unmistakable smell of a decomposing body. Turning on the lights, they saw the apartment had 6 bedrooms. On the hallway floor in one corner was a giant Hello Kitty doll prominently displayed. It was a mermaid-shaped doll, stained with blood and emitting a foul odor. A police officer picked up a metal rod lying on the floor and poked at the Hello Kitty doll. When he prodded the head, he felt something hard inside. At this point, they were almost certain that a murder had taken place in the apartment and immediately called for backup. When additional officers arrived at the scene, they carefully cut open the doll. Inside, the doll was stuffed with mothballs, emitting a pungent odor. After removing all the stuffing, they discovered a human skull inside the doll's head. The skull had been cooked, giving off a foul stench, with fluids oozing out, and the flesh not yet fully decomposed. Upon initial examination, the skull was incomplete, with the lower jaw missing, and only a few teeth remaining in the upper part. The police also found fragments of teeth and hair scattered inside the doll. In other parts of the apartment, they found more teeth, 2 stoves containing mothballs, a small refrigerator, and a hammer. Most notably on the ground floor terrace, they found a plastic bag filled with internal organs that were not fully decomposed but had also been cooked. The refrigerator had scratches inside, believed to be from storing the body. The 2 stoves were identified as the tools used to cook the head and internal organs. Inside, remnants of partially decomposed body tissue were still present. Since the head and organs found at the scene had been cooked, with the skin, flesh, and hair destroyed, it was impossible to conduct DNA testing to determine whether the victim was indeed Manny. The police enlisted the help of forensic dental experts to assist in the investigation. They used photographic comparison techniques to identify the victim. The photo used for comparison was one of Manny smiling, focusing on the 2 remaining teeth found in the skull inside the doll. The results showed that the size and position of the 2 teeth matched perfectly. From this, the police confirmed that the remains were indeed those of Manny. The victim, Manny, was born in 1975 and was 23 years old at the time of her death. When she was 6, her father left the family due to debt, abandoning his wife and child. Her mother later remarried, but didn't want to take care of her. Abandoned by her family, Manny was taken in by an orphanage, where she spent her childhood. As time passed, Manny turned 15. She was forced to leave the orphanage and become independent as she had reached adulthood. According to the regulations, children without congenital disabilities were not allowed to stay at the orphanage past the age of 15. After leaving the orphanage, homeless and without shelter, Manny struggled to find work to support herself. However, lacking job skills, she could only take on menial labor jobs like waitressing, delivering newspapers, and so on, but was frequently fired due to clumsiness. When she had money, Manny would rent a room in cheap motels. When she didn't, she was forced to live in filthy, rundown slums. In her reckless youth, Manny associated with some delinquent young men and often spent time with them, cruising through the streets and alleys on motorbikes. Perhaps due to her youthful impulsiveness and curiosity for new experiences, she fell into drug addiction. Her meager income barely covered her living expenses, and now with the added burden of her addiction, Manny was constantly in financial distress. To earn money, she became a sex worker, frequently working in the Yamati and Mong Kok areas. Her life continued this way until 1996, when at 21 years old, Manny was introduced by friends to a job at a nightclub. Compared to her previous work, this environment was safer and the income was higher. After less than a year, Manny met a pimp who frequented the nightclub. The two started dating and moved in together. This man was named Wu Ji Yuan, also known as a Hai. Manny fell deeply in love with Ji Yuan. She even quit her job, determined to build a happy life with him. However, Ji Yuan's mother didn't like Manny, believing she came from an unclear background and was a promiscuous bad woman. Because of this, Manny and Ji Yuan were unable to get married. 2 years later, Manny gave birth to a son. She moved in with Ji Yuan's mother in Lei Ka village, New Territories. For reasons unknown, after living with his mother, Ji Yuan became increasingly violent. Perhaps influenced by his mother's words, Ji Yuan frequently suspected Manny of cheating on him. They often argued, and Ji Yuan even resorted to physically abusing her. Witnessing Ji Yuan's escalating behavior, Manny became determined to leave with her son to avoid further harm. However, she knew that if she left him, she would have no source of income. Therefore, she kept her plans secret while saving money. Manny secretly returned to work as a bar hostess. Previously, she had taken out a loan with high interest. Unable to repay the debt, she was kidnapped at her home by the loan shark, who was none other than Chan, one of the 3 perpetrators of the crime. Together with his accomplices, Wailuan and Xingqiu, they murdered Manny. After identifying the suspects, the police swiftly initiated a manhunt. They received a tip that the suspect was hiding in an apartment in Sheklai village, New Territories. This location was about 1.4 miles north of where Manny lived, and about 7.5 miles from Granville Road, where her remains were discovered. With this key lead, the police immediately raided Chan's apartment. At the time, he was in the kitchen cooking with his wife while their young child lay in a crib. Confronted with the unexpected arrival of the police, Chan appeared shocked. He could not believe he had been caught so quickly. After Chan was arrested, the police gathered more detailed information about the case. They continued their pursuit of the remaining 2 suspects, Xingqiu and Wailuan. Upon hearing that Chan had been caught, Xingqiu and Wailuan quickly fled. However, 2 days later, realizing he could not escape, Xingqiu surrendered to the police, hoping for leniency from the law. At this point, the last suspect, Wailuan, was still on the run. After reading the news that Xingqiu had turned himself in, Wailuan, fearing his hideout would be discovered, fled Hong Kong and crossed the border into mainland China. Upon learning that Wailuan had escaped Hong Kong, the Hong Kong police contacted Interpol to assist in his capture. 9 months later, during a routine operation, Chinese police stumbled upon Wailuan. He was unable to produce any identification and was promptly arrested. Shortly after, Wailuan was extradited back to Hong Kong to face justice. 33 years old, was the mastermind behind the crime. He worked as a cashier at a nightclub and had known Manny for many years. Additionally, Chan was a member of a notorious gang. His 2 underlings, Xingqiu, 26, and Wailuan, 19, followed his orders without question. 2 years earlier, Manny's grandmother had fallen seriously ill and urgently needed money for treatment. Man Yi's boyfriend, Wu Jiwen, was a hardcore addict and had drained their savings to fuel his drug habit. In desperation, Manny resorted to theft. She used her charm to approach Chan and stole 8,000 Hong Kong dollars, about 1,030 US dollars, and some other valuables from him. Upon discovering the theft, Chan immediately suspected Manny. He ordered his two underlings, Xingqiu and Liang Weilwan, to go to Man Yi's house to collect the debt. By this time, Manny had already spent the stolen money. She begged them for more time, promising to find a way to repay the debt. To make money to pay off her debt, Fan Man Yi was forced to continue working as a sex worker. By this point, Chan Man Lok had become a pimp, forcing her to serve his clients to pay him back. Sometime later, Man Yi became pregnant, but didn't know who the father was. Her heavy pregnancy made it impossible for her to continue working. Despite this, the three men did not relent and continued to force her to serve his clients. Overwhelmed, she had no choice but to comply. Manny had managed to pay back half of the 8,000 Hong Kong dollars. She thought she might finally escape this miserable life, but to her shock, suddenly raised the interest, inflating the remaining 4,000 Hong Kong dollars to 30,000 Hong Kong dollars. It turned out that Chan realized he was a lucrative source of income. He had no intention of letting her go and wanted to continue exploiting her to make even more money. Manny was furious but didn't dare to resist, enduring the situation in silence. She continued selling her body, using all the money she earned to pay off her debt to Chan. 1 year later, Manny had paid Chan an additional 14,000 Hong Kong dollars. Including the 4,000 Hong Kong dollars she had previously repaid, she had paid a total of 18,000 Hong Kong dollars, approximately 2,300 US dollars, far exceeding the original debt of 8,000 Hong Kong dollars. Manny still had her family and her own life. She was exhausted from the oppression and control of Chan and his accomplices. She was determined to stop servicing clients and refused to answer their debt-collecting calls. This defiance enraged Chan and his gang, and they decided to teach her a lesson she would never forget. 2 months before the crime occurred, Chan sent his two henchmen, Xingqiu and Weilwan, to Manny's residence to kidnap her. They brought her to apartment number 31 on Granville Road, Tsim Sha Tsui, where she was imprisoned in a room on the 3rd floor. The building at 31, Granville Road, had two owners. Due to disagreements, they had stopped using the building, causing it to fall into severe disrepair. Several of the apartments were left vacant and unrented. Chan had two friends living on the 2nd floor of the building. Knowing the apartment on the 3rd floor was empty, they recommended it to Chan. The apartment had 6 bedrooms. Chan and his wife lived in room 4. Longxing Cho and his girlfriend lived in room 6, and Weilwan and his girlfriend, Afong, lived in room 1. Manny was kept locked in room 3. Since Chan's wife had just given birth, she frequently stayed with friends on the floor below to take care of the baby, and only occasionally came up to the 3rd floor to sleep. The two friends from the 2nd floor often came up to the 3rd floor to hang out. As a result, during the month he was imprisoned in the 3rd floor apartment. Up to 8 people knew she was being abused. On her very first day of captivity, interrogated her, yelling at her for not repaying the debt and ignoring his calls. He then ordered Weilwan to beat her. Weilwan kicked Manny over 50 times. As a frail woman, she couldn't defend herself against the brutal blows and could only scream in pain. To prevent Manny's cries for help from being heard outside, Chan and his gang used wooden boards to block all the windows in the room. Then Chan, Xingqiu, and Weilwan stripped Manny of her clothes and took turns assaulting her. Manny was tortured to the point of near unconsciousness, lying motionless on the floor. Meanwhile, the 3 men sat nearby, eating hot pot and mocking her pain. In their twisted amusement, they even threw scalding hot food from the pot onto her, forcing her to crawl like a dog to retrieve it. Humiliated, Manny naturally refused to cooperate. Seeing this, John picked up the food from the floor, pried open her mouth, and shoved it in, forcing her to eat. Manny vomited violently in disgust. Unfortunately, some of the vomit splashed onto Chan's shirt. Unable to avoid it in time, Chan flew into a rage, grabbing Manny off the floor and unleashing his fury on her. Still not satisfied, Chan poured boiling oil into Manny's mouth. Early the next morning, while Chan was sound asleep in room 4, Xingqiu and Weilwan sneaked into room 3, where Manny was being held. They kicked her hard, jolting her awake. They then used a lighter to heat her feet until her skin burned and bled. Next, they sprinkled chili powder on the bleeding wounds, but the torture didn't stop there. Wailun took a plastic straw and a bottle, heated them over a flame until the plastic melted, and then poured the hot, molten plastic onto Man Yi's feet. Xingqiu held her legs tightly to prevent her from moving. They laughed cruelly as Man Yi writhed in pain and threatened to beat her even worse if she screamed. The molten plastic stuck to her flesh, causing her feet to be covered in blistering burns. Afterward, they used a wooden stick to pop the blisters and sprinkled chili powder on the open wounds. Man Yi was in unbearable pain, screaming and moaning in agony until she passed out from the torment. Xingqiu then stood up and urinated on Man Yi's face. Seeing this, Wailun called for his girlfriend, a Fong, and ordered her to defecate and force Man Yi to eat it. For more than a month, Man Yi was subjected to daily brutal torture. The three men treated her suffering as entertainment. They even gave her drugs, which eventually led her to become addicted. She constantly scratched the scars on her body. To stop her from scratching her wounds, the three men took turns beating her hands savagely with metal rods. They then tied her hands with electrical wires and hung her from the ceiling. Because her body weight hung on her arms for an extended period, her hands became swollen and bruised. Chan eventually let her down and ordered her to place her hands on the floor, then proceeded to smash her hands repeatedly with a metal rod until they were crushed. 1 month into her captivity, in a state of delirium, Man Yi secretly stole some drugs from Chan. When they caught her, the three men beat her up. One blow to the head knocked her unconscious. Since this had happened many times before, the three men didn't care and left her there, leaving the apartment to go to a bar. That evening when they returned, they found Man Yi lying unconscious in the bathroom. To check if she was still alive, Chan grabbed a pipe and struck her heart in the chest. Only then did Man Yi's body react. When her body convulsed, a Fong cried out in fear. Chan and Wailun reassured her by lying, saying that Man Yi was just having a drug overdose. A while later, Man Yi went still again, but Chan wasn't finished. He took a lighter and held it to her feet. In excruciating pain, she jerked her feet away. They then dragged her to a corner of the room, and after that, each of them went back to their own rooms to sleep. The next morning, Wailun woke his girlfriend, asking her to check on Man Yi. A Fong went into the bathroom and found Man Yi lying motionless on the floor. Worried, she placed her hand on Man Yi's chest, but her heart had stopped and her limbs were stiff. Terrified, a Fong ran back to the room and told Wailun and the others what had happened. Fan Man Yi was dead, but they showed no concern about dealing with the body, leaving her there. It wasn't until a few days later, when the body started to decompose and emit a foul odor, that they decided to take action. They dragged Man Yi's body out of the bathroom, dismembered it into several pieces, and stored the parts in a refrigerator, waiting for the right moment to dispose of them. To avoid suspicion, they placed the body parts in various plastic bags and scattered them at different garbage dumps. After disposing of most of the body, they realized they still had a bag containing internal organs. Growing tired of the hassle, Chan, not wanting to go outside again, casually threw the bag out the window. It landed on the ground floor terrace. Now, only Man Yi's head remained to be dealt with. Chan placed the head in a pot, boiled it for a while, and then took it out to cool. As he stared at Man Yi's lifeless face, he muttered, "Stay still. I'm gonna make you up." He then grabbed a mermaid-shaped Hello Kitty doll, removed some of the stuffing from inside, placed Man Yi's head inside the doll, and stitched it back up. After finishing with the body, they left the apartment, abandoning the Hello Kitty doll containing Man Yi's head. In fact, several weeks before receiving the tip-off from Afong, the police had received complaints from residents at 31. Granville wrote about a foul odor in the building. However, when the police checked at that time, they didn't find anything suspicious and assumed the smell was due to pollution in the environment. After the case came to light, some nearby residents mentioned that around April and May, they had often seen gang members coming and going from the apartment, but didn't know who they were. Some even reported hearing chopping sounds from the third-floor apartment, but since the windows were covered, they couldn't see inside. A year and a half later, the case went to trial at the Hong Kong High Court with a jury of 7. Chan Man Lok, Xing Cho, and Liang Wailun were charged with murder, kidnapping, and preventing the lawful burial of a body. During the trial, all 3 defendants admitted to kidnapping and preventing the burial, but denied any involvement in the murder. Xingqiu and Wailun claimed they were simply following Chan's orders. Witness Afong testified that she did not directly witness Man Yi's death, nor did she know the specific cause. The defense attorney argued that Man Yi didn't die from the assault, but from a drug overdose. However, the prosecution refuted this, citing the testimony of the defendant Xingqiu. He had seen blood coming from Man Yi's ears, indicating that she died as a result of severe physical abuse. After 2 months of trial, the jury, with a 6-1 decision, declared that the 3 defendants were not guilty of murder, but were guilty of manslaughter. The Hong Kong High Court sentenced Chan, Xingqiu, and Liang Weilun to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole for 25 years, which is the maximum sentence for manslaughter. Nevertheless, the 3 defendants disagreed with the court's decision and appealed to the appellate court. Chan Manlok and Weilun's sentences were upheld, but Xingqiu's appeal was successful. Before the incident, Liang Xingqiu had advised Man Yi to pay her debt. Although there was no concrete evidence, it was confirmed that Xingqiu was not present at the Tsim Sha Sui apartment during the days leading up to Man Yi's death. In March 2004, based on Xingqiu's behavior in prison and his decision to turn himself in after the crime, the appellate judge reduced Xingqiu's life sentence to 18 years in prison. In April 2014, Xingqiu was released from prison. However, in December 2021, more than 7 years after his release, Xingqiu committed another crime. He acted inappropriately with his friend's 10-year-old daughter. Liang Xingqiu was once again handcuffed and sentenced to 12 months in prison. The Hello Kitty murder case shocked Hong Kong and the world. It was listed among Hong Kong's top 10 most notorious crimes. Out of curiosity, many people visited the building at 31 Granville Road. The residents and shop owners felt extremely uneasy and eventually moved away. The apartment where the crime took place was abandoned as no one dared to go near it. Some people reported encountering strange occurrences in the building. One person claimed to have seen a Hello Kitty doll identical to the one containing Fan Man Yi's head left beside a trash bin. But the doll appeared clean. Others reported seeing a figure moving past security cameras at night, though it wasn't a thief, causing fear and confusion. Today, the building at 31 Granville Road has been demolished and replaced with a new structure. The story of this horrifying murder has gradually faded into obscurity. Few people now know that the bustling, lively street was once the site of such a gruesome, haunting crime. Story 5. In the early hours of October 12, 2021, the city of Kofu in Yamanashi Prefecture, Japan, was peacefully sleeping. At 3:50 a.m., a resident was suddenly awakened by a loud explosion. Then, the sound of burning wood echoed clearly in his ears. He went to the window and saw the neighboring Inoue family's house engulfed in fierce flames. Fire and black smoke were gradually consuming the entire house. Just 10 minutes earlier, this resident had heard strange noises coming from the Inoue house, but he was too sleepy to pay attention. Little did he know that a fire would break out now. The neighbor hurriedly called to report the fire, praying in his heart that the entire Inoue family would be safe and sound. After calling the police, he quickly went outside to see if he could help. By this time, other neighbors had also discovered the situation, but the fire was already too large, so everyone was helpless and could only wait for the firefighters to arrive. Surprisingly, police cars arrived at the scene before the fire trucks. With them were 2 girls, who turned out to be the daughters of the Inoue family, whose house was on fire. The older sister was named Keiko Inoue, 17 years old, a 12th grade student. The younger sister was named Riko Inoue, 14 years old, in 9th grade. It turned out that a few minutes before the house caught fire, Keiko and Riko were sleeping on the 2nd floor when they vaguely heard strange noises from downstairs. The younger sister Riko thought their parents were arguing and wanted to go down to intervene. When she went downstairs, the scene before her eyes terrified her to the extreme. She saw a strange man standing there holding a knife, while her mother was lying motionless on the floor. Faced with this scene, Riko ran away immediately. But the man quickly caught the girl and raised his knife to strike her head forcefully. In this dangerous situation, Riko struggled fiercely, avoiding the knife and knocking it out of the man's hand. Then she ran upstairs at full speed. Strangely, the man did not chase after her. Riko returned to her bedroom on the 2nd floor in panic, locked the door, and told her older sister Keiko about what had just happened downstairs. After hearing this, Keiko also felt very scared. But after thinking calmly, she realized that hiding in the room was useless at this point. Because her younger sister was injured, they needed to leave the house as soon as possible. It was now 3:45 a.m. The 2 sisters Keiko and Riko decided to act quickly. With extraordinary courage, they jumped from the 2nd floor balcony onto the roof of adjacent carport, then carefully jumped to the ground. Fear overwhelmed them, making them forget to put on shoes, running barefoot on the quiet streets. Only when they had run a considerable distance and felt temporarily safe did the sisters dare to stop. With trembling hands, Keiko took out the phone she had brought from home and called the police. Her voice choked as she recounted that a burglar had broken into their house. Their parents might be in danger, and the perpetrator was still in the house. Although they had called the police, the two sisters still felt uneasy because Rico's head wound was bleeding. In the quiet night, they continued to run barefoot on the street. Later, they reached a 24-hour convenience store about 1,640 feet from their house, and told the store clerk about what had just happened. After hearing this, the clerk hurriedly took out medical supplies to bandage Rico's wound. The two sisters were too scared to go home, so they stayed at the store waiting for the police to arrive. Not long after, through the glass of the convenience store, the two sisters fearfully saw a bright orange-red flame rising in the sky not far away. At this point, they still didn't know what was happening. It wasn't until the police arrived and took them back home that they realized the burning house was their own. Shortly after the police arrived at the scene, the firefighters also arrived. While extinguishing the fire, the police began searching for witnesses and suspicious people around the area. A police officer discovered a suspicious man nearby, but when he was about to approach and question him, the man ran away. Around 7 a.m., when it was light outside, the fire was finally extinguished. Because it was a wooden house, and the fire was so large, almost the entire house was completely burned down, with only some of the first-floor frames left standing, and about to collapse. Even the first floor of the neighboring house was affected. Afterward, the police cordoned off the scene. After the fire was extinguished, the scene of the fire appeared like a tragic battlefield. The destructive power of the fire, along with the large amount of water used to extinguish it, had destroyed many important pieces of evidence. However, through careful searching, investigators discovered several gas canisters at the scene, a clear sign that this was a deliberate arson. Among the blackened ruins, the police found 2 charred bodies. Notably, both victims were lying straight, with no signs of contortion. This discovery led to a hypothesis. It was very likely that these 2 victims had died before the fire occurred. Although their faces were difficult to recognize, they were likely to be Mr. and Mrs. Inoue. The forensic results later confirmed that they were Mr. Mariji Inoue and Mrs. Ikea Inoue, the owners of the house. The autopsy results showed that both victims had more than 10 deep stab wounds to their internal organs, and the cause of death was excessive blood loss. The younger daughter Riko was also injured, with a dent in her skull and a 2-inch long wound from her forehead to the top of her head. The male victim was Mr. Mariji Inoue, 55 years old, an employee of a construction engineering company. He had a serious and calm personality and loved his 2 daughters very much. Whenever neighbors praised his daughters for resembling him, his serious face would break into a happy smile. The female victim was Mrs. Akiya Inoue, 50 years old, who worked as a nurse. She had been the head of the community committee. People around her felt she was enthusiastic and kind. She and her husband had been married for over 10 years, and their relationship was still as sweet as when they first married. She loved her 2 daughters as much as her husband did. When chatting with neighbors, she often said that she would try to work hard because her daughters were still young, and there would be many expenses in the future. The Inoue family was once the image of happiness and harmony in the eyes of their neighbors. Every weekend they would drive to travel together. Who could have imagined that, in just one night, fate could turn so cruelly? Mr. and Mrs. Inoue had passed away forever, leaving behind 2 orphaned daughters. Even the beloved cat on the first floor did not escape the clutches of fate. The pain of losing their loved ones so suddenly and violently plunged Keiko and Riko into deep sorrow. This peaceful area had never witnessed such a brutal crime. Faced with this tragedy, the police force quickly launched an investigation determined to bring the perpetrator to light, restore justice for the Inoue family, and alleviate the fear that was enveloping the community. Although when reporting to the police, Keiko had said that a burglar had broken into the house based on the fire situation, the police believed that the perpetrator might have planned in advance, deliberately setting the fire to destroy evidence. Therefore, they began to investigate the social relationships of the Inoue couple. Surprisingly, just 9 hours after the incident occurred, at 7 p.m. on the same day, the police received a confession call. The man on the other end of the line, crying, said, "I killed someone." After receiving the report, The police asked him to stay where he was, not to move, then quickly set out to the location where he was, which was a patrol police station about 18.6 miles from the victim's house. It turned out that this man intended to go there to turn himself in, but found that there were no police on duty, so he called the police station. The police quickly arrived at the scene. The man had driven there himself, and there was nothing notable in the car. On his face were clear marks from the incident, obvious burns, and the little finger on his right hand appeared to be broken. He seemed very emotionally unstable and moved stiffly. When the police asked about the specific situation, he stammered and couldn't speak clearly. The interrogation lasted until 2 a.m. the next day before yielding results. From the fragmented confessions, a horrifying picture gradually emerged. Afterward, the police arrested the man on charges of premeditated murder. He was quickly taken for treatment to prepare for the next steps of the investigation and trial process. 1 day later, after completing treatment, at 2 p.m., this man was taken away by the police. At the same time, the media also reported on this incident. According to the information, the suspect was 19 years old, a high school student. According to law at that time, 20 years old was considered an adult, so he was still considered a minor. When facing the public, the police had to cover his face. The windows of the police car were also covered with black curtains to prevent others from photographing his face. Moreover, in media reports, all personal information that could identify the suspect, such as his real name, place of residence and photos, was not allowed to be disclosed. In the Kofu arson case, because the suspect's personal information was not disclosed, in just a few short days, public curiosity quickly reached its peak. All kinds of rumors spread wildly on the internet. Regarding the suspect's real name, some said his surname was Okamoto, others said it was Yoshida. Some said he had blonde hair, a fierce face, and looked very scary. In the rumors, the surname Miura was also mentioned many times. In Kofu City, there were many vineyard managers with the surname Miura. Therefore, their reputation was also negatively affected, leading to a decrease in the vineyard's revenue. In a short time, social media was flooded with photos of suspected perpetrators, causing a wave of suspicion and seriously affecting the lives of many innocent people. A rumor spread on the internet that was even harder for the public to accept, claiming that the suspect was a schoolmate of Keiko. The high school they were attending was Yamanashi Prefectural Central High School, a boarding school with half of its students working part-time while studying. As rumors spread, the atmosphere in the school became tense. Students began to speculate about the identity of the suspect. Anyone who had been absent recently became a subject of suspicion. In addition to being curious about the suspect's identity, the public also wanted to know what deep grudge he had against the Inoue family. Regarding the motive for the crime, one of the parties involved, Keiko, did not want to disclose. Therefore, more rumors emerged. Among the rumors that were put forward, a hypothesis emerged suggesting that the suspect was someone who had pursued Keiko. According to this, the man had been prevented by Keiko's parents when trying to approach her at school, leading to resentment and determination for revenge. Another stream of public opinion made more serious accusations about Keiko, claiming that she had a promiscuous lifestyle and maintained multiple ambiguous relationships. They speculated that the suspect, one of Keiko's pursuers upon learning the truth, felt he had misplaced his affections, thus leading to frenzied revenge. Some even suspected that Keiko was involved in this case because she was not injured. There were even extreme opinions suspecting Keiko of being an accomplice in the case, based on the fact that she was not injured. However, the truth about Keiko was completely opposite to these malicious rumors. From a young age, Keiko had been famous for her pure beauty with beautiful big round eyes, a renowned beauty in Kofu City. In addition, she could play the piano and paint, like a main character in a shoujo manga. At school, Keiko had a gentle personality and was polite to everyone. Although she initially had difficulty in communication, with continuous efforts, Keiko gradually became more confident and lively, getting along better with her classmates. Not only focusing on studying, Keiko also actively participated in extracurricular activities. She was an energetic member of the baseball club and the drama club, where she showed her passion for script writing. With excellent academic achievements and a high sense of responsibility, Keiko quickly became an important member of the student council. She became an ideal role model and inspiration for many classmates. Although admired and pursued by many people, she always declined. When tragedy struck her family, Keiko suddenly became the focus of unwanted attention. The pain of losing both parents was enough to make her ache, but the wave of concern and comments from the public made her feel suffocated. Social media was flooded with opinions about her, even from complete strangers. The pressure of public opinion weighed heavily on Keiko's shoulders, making her unable to concentrate on her studies, severely disrupting her life. Just 9 days after the tragedy, when the police investigation was still in a sensitive stage, a newspaper published information about the suspect, disregarding regulations protecting minors. This action not only sparked controversy about journalistic ethics, but also showed signs of violating the law. Notably, this was not the first time this newspaper had crossed the boundaries of professional ethics. In the past, they had repeatedly disclosed information about juvenile offenders, despite legal regulations. However, they still insisted that considering the fact that this crime was premeditated and had very serious consequences, they decided to report it this way. Just a few months before the incident occurred, the Japanese parliament had passed a bill lowering the age of adulthood from 20 to 18. Along with that, the juvenile law was also amended, creating the concept of special minors for those aged 18 to 19 with stricter penalties. According to the new law, after a prosecutor indicts a special minor, the press is allowed to disclose the identity and image of the subject. However, the newspaper's action was still considered to be beyond legal limits for two main reasons. First, at that time, the investigation was still ongoing, and there had been no official indictment decision. Second, these new regulations would only take effect from the following year. Therefore, this newspaper was publicly criticized by many Japanese bar associations. However, thanks to this article, more details about the case were revealed. The suspect's name was Yuki Endo, 19 years old, a high school student, a schoolmate of Keiko, and he was also a member of the student council. After getting to know Keiko, he actively created many opportunities to interact and was very attentive to her every action. 12 days before the incident occurred, at 1 p.m., Yuki had blocked Keiko at the bicycle parking lot and confessed his feelings to her. To express his affection, he gave her a Tiffany necklace. But Keiko gently declined, explaining that they didn't really know each other yet, and she didn't want to enter a relationship with someone she wasn't truly familiar with. However, Keiko's rejection did not make Yuki give up. A few days later, one day after school, he secretly followed Keiko home, and thus learned her home address. In the following days, he continued to harass Keiko, inviting her to dinner and sending some luxury items to her home without permission. Until October 7th, because of being harassed to the point where she had no other choice, Keiko reluctantly agreed to have dinner with him. But in Yuki's eyes, this was a sign that Keiko had accepted his feelings. Therefore that night, he was very proactive. However, this dinner only made Keiko feel more that they were not compatible and could not date. The next day, Keiko sent a message to Yuki, once again, clearly stating that she would not date him. After that, she blocked contact with him. Yuki became furiously angry when rejected again, and finally went down the path of crime. When the media reported, people learned about the cause and course of events. Situations like this are not uncommon in the school environment, so the case attracted special attention from public opinion. At the same time, through Yuki's confession, the police also gradually clarified the course of events. For days before the incident occurred on October 8th, Yuki had discovered that the message he sent to Keiko was still unread. At this point, he understood that he had been rejected once again and felt extremely angry. The last time he was rejected when confessing his love, he had been mocked by those around him, saying that he didn't know his own limits. Being rejected multiple times made him unable to bear it anymore. In his anger, a crazy idea was born in his mind. He began to harbor a plan to kidnap Keiko, take her to a remote, deserted place. In his delusion, he wanted to interrogate Keiko about why she rejected his feelings, as if she owed him an explanation. Not stopping there, Yuki also nurtured the intention of imprisoning Keiko, wanting her to taste the consequences of rejecting his feelings. These dark thoughts kept swirling in Yuki's head. He went to a department store to buy pliers, a drill, and other tools, intending to use them to pull out nails and stab needles into Keiko's body. He had found an abandoned house near his great-grandmother's house, considering it a perfect hideout to carry out his criminal acts. The purchase of a sleeping bag and stockpiling of dry food showed that Yuki had prepared for a long-term scenario, ready to hide to avoid police pursuit. After preparations were complete, he he began to closely monitor Keiko's every move at school, waiting for an opportunity to act. One day, Yuki discovered Keiko being intimate and walking very close to another male student looking like a couple. Seeing this scene, the flames of jealousy and anger burned away Yuki's reason. He immediately abandoned the kidnapping plan and decided to use a more cruel method to leave Keiko with an unforgettable memory for life. However, the male friend who had a close relationship with Keiko was actually a female student dressed in somewhat masculine clothing. After deciding on the new plan, Yuki went to buy several different types of knives, a 7-inch cleaver and a fruit-paring knife. He also went online to watch videos on how to explode gas canisters and break windows without making noise. In the following days, he successively prepared window-breaking tools, 3 lighters, and 9 gas canisters. On October 7th, Yuki didn't go to school, which made his classmates feel very strange because he had never been absent before. Some speculated that the failed confession had affected him. However, no one could have imagined what horrific events would unfold the next day. In the early hours of October 12th, Yuki drove with all the tools to Keiko's house, intending to end the life of the girl he liked and her family. His own hands. At 3:20 a.m., he arrived in front of Keiko's house. He paced back and forth outside the house, hesitating for 10 minutes, finally determined to act. He taped up a window on the ground floor, then broke the glass to break in. During this process, he did not make much noise. Then, Yuki sneaked into the bedroom on the first floor where Keiko's parents were sleeping. When the couple heard the noise, they drowsily woke up to see what was happening. But taking advantage of their not being fully awake, Yuki stabbed Mr. Morigi. The victim both resisted and called for his wife, but the attacker did not stop. When Mrs. Aki woke up, the scene before her eyes terrified her. She didn't have time to think much, but instinctively ran out of the room. At this point, Yuki had drawn another knife, chasing after her while swinging both knives in his hands. Eventually, Mrs. Aki could not escape the clutches of the killer. She reflexively raised her hands to block the attack, but it was all in vain. Soon after, she also collapsed on the floor. At this point, Yuki discovered Riko coming downstairs. He wounded Riko but didn't chase after her anymore. Instead, he lit the oil in the lighter, igniting the gas canisters, intending to burn the whole house in a sea of flames. But he himself was also injured in the process. After finishing these actions, Yuki left the scene, but he didn't run away, instead standing outside with the neighbors who had discovered the situation, watching the flames rise. During this time, a police officer suddenly approached to question him, causing him to panic and flee, driving to an empty house 18.6 miles, 30 kilometers away, where he had initially planned to kidnap Keiko. By evening, feeling desperate about everything, he decided to turn himself in. On the day of the incident, Keiko was supposed to represent high school students in giving a speech at a youth education seminar. Her parents were proud and expected her to have a bright future. But this fire had completely destroyed that speech while also destroying a happy family. During the police interrogation, Keiko kept blaming herself. She said that she should have been the target of revenge. Why wasn't she targeted? It was because of her that her innocent parents and sister were implicated, yet she was the only one unharmed. On April 8, 2022, the Kofu City Prosecutor's Office indicted Yuki Endo. He was charged with premeditated murder and arson. At this time, the revised juvenile law had also officially taken effect. Media outlets rushed to report on this case. Much information related to the suspect was brought to light. According to the information, Yuki Endo's birth name was Yuki Watanabe, then 19 years old, living with his parents in Chua City near Kofu City. From a young age, he had an introverted personality, often hiding and not daring to come out when guests visited the house. When he was in 2nd or 3rd grade of elementary school, Yuki's father was arrested for stealing 2 water heaters from a water supply company. Unexpectedly, this news quickly spread in the elementary school. His classmates hated him, didn't want to play with him, and even bullied him. After that, Yuki became very afraid of going to school. This incident also became a deep wound in his heart. Over time, his classmates gradually forgot about that shameful incident, but Yuki's family experienced major upheavals. His parents often argued in front of him, even physically fighting, throwing objects at each other, sometimes even using knives to fight. When he was in 5th grade, another incident occurred. A close friend suspected Yuki of stealing his game card. Even after searching Yuki's entire house, they couldn't find it. He repeatedly assured his mother that he didn't steal. His mother in her heart also didn't believe her son would do something like his father. She thought this was because the friend's parents didn't want their child to play with Yuki, so they deliberately framed him. Later, when Yuki was 12 years old, his mother had him transfer schools. But the parents of that friend had told others about this incident, angrily saying that this child would be spoiled by his mother's indulgence. After transferring schools when he was in 6th grade, Yuki became obsessed with the manga series Death Note. He even told those around him that just by writing someone's name down, you could eliminate troublesome people, and that feeling must be very interesting. He also wanted to do such things. That year, conflicts in Yuki's family became more serious, and finally his parents divorced. After that, his mother quickly remarried. When he was 13, he changed his surname from Watanabe to Endo. Not long after, this new family had a new member, and he had a younger sister. Yuki's stepfather was a wealthy man. As a result, his life became more affluent. Before he even graduated from elementary school, he had his own iPhone. He even brought an expensive golf club to school to show off, making many classmates feel envious. However, the relationship between Yuki and his stepfather was actually not good. Once, when he was playing by the river, he accidentally fell into the water. His stepfather stood beside watching him struggle, even laughing. After rescuing him, his stepfather said, "Who do you think allowed you to survive?" From then on, Yuki became afraid of his stepfather. At 13, Yuki entered a junior high school in Kaffa City and joined the tennis club. In the summer of his first year of junior high, the school organized an outdoor activity in a forest. At that time, Yuki experienced rare moments of joy. Not long after that, he lost a tennis match. After being severely reprimanded by the coach, he decided to leave the tennis club. Due to the newborn sister, the family apartment became crowded. Therefore, his stepfather rented an additional apartment next door and let Yuki live there alone. His mother also agreed. Sometimes he could hear the laughter of his stepfather and others from across the wall, making him feel as if that family only had the three of them, while he was just an extra. However, this life didn't last long. When he was 14, his stepfather passed away due to illness. Throughout his junior high school years, Yuki had almost no presents and hardly any friends. When he entered high school, he wanted to change his past self, hoping that in the future he could find a good job. Therefore, he began to act positively. Yuki showed a strong determination to improve himself and integrate into the school environment. Never being late for school and always taking detailed notes showed a high sense of discipline. Despite facing difficulties due to a weak foundation, leading to having to repeat a year, Yuki still persevered in his efforts. This effort was recognized by both teachers and the student council leadership. However, Yuki's behavior outside of school hours showed worrying signs about his mental health. Suddenly laughing loudly for no reason, saying he thought of something funny, then mumbling to himself, made others unable to understand. Sometimes he also participated in school radio broadcasts. On the radio, his clear and energetic voice showed good communication potential. However, when he left this microphone, Yuki became silent and withdrew again. This contrast was further highlighted in the school's cultural activities. While friends were enthusiastically discussing, Yuki sat alone, isolated, intently folding papers into darts. After falling in love with Keiko Inoue, a beautiful and excellent girl, Yuki was eager to express himself. He also joined the baseball club that Keiko was participating in, then participated in club activities with her. Later, thanks to the trust of the former student council president, along with having few competitors, he was chosen as the new student council president. This made those around him feel surprised, because he was originally a quiet person, who didn't like to stand out. After being elected as student council president in April 2021, 19-year-old Yuki Endo began to pay attention to his appearance. He trimmed his eyebrows, changed his hairstyle, hoping this would make Keiko notice him more. His new appearance surprised everyone, praising him for becoming more handsome. During that year's school cultural festival, due to being in the COVID-19 period, Yuki, along with some other students, invented a series of disinfectant spray bottles. The packaging had a picture of a legendary bird. These disinfectant spray bottles were all given to the school. The legendary bird mentioned is the two-headed bird recorded in a book about epidemics in Japan in 1858. According to legend, it was the divine crow of the three Kumano Mountains, with one black head and one white head, and both feet were black. According to records, in 1857, a two-headed bird appeared on Mount Hakusen in Ishikawa Prefecture. People believed that an epidemic would break out the following year, but those who worshipped it would avoid the epidemic. Due to the outbreak of the epidemic, the image of this bird was introduced by the Yamanashi Prefectural Museum in April 2020 and became a hot topic. In October of that year, during the epidemic prevention period, the disinfectant spray bottle invented by Yuki and his friends was highly appreciated by the authorities and was published in local newspapers. He thought these achievements could win Keiko's affection. However, the reality was not so. At home, Yuki and his mother had an argument about employment after high school graduation. His mother wanted to arrange a job for him, but he didn't like it. He felt that if he did that job, his efforts in high school would be in vain. Even if he earned money from that job, his mother would take it away. After being rejected by Keiko, Yuki completely lost his reason and went down a path of no return. 2 years after the incident occurred, the trial of Yuki Endo was held at the Kofu City Court. Yuki Endo was charged with premeditated murder, arson, and other charges. In court, when faced with the prosecutor's accusations, Yuki always remained silent. The defense argued that during his upbringing he was unfortunate, which affected his personality, leading to mental disorders, rendering him incapable of criminal responsibility. However, later a psychiatrist appointed by the prosecutor conducted a psychological assessment of Yuki Endo and rejected this view. The case went through 21 court sessions and ended on January 18, 2024. This time, Yuki Endo was no longer silent. He admitted his crimes and showed remorse, but did not want to apologize to the victims. Keiko Inoue appeared in court via video connection and expressed her opinion. She always blamed herself for implicating her family. Regarding how the defendant, Yuki Endo, would be sentenced due to fear of retaliation and to protect her sister, Riko, she didn't say much. After the trial, the court announced the verdict. The defendant, Yuki Endo, was guilty of premeditated murder, arson, and other charges and was sentenced to death. After the trial, the defense disagreed with the verdict and appealed to the Tokyo High Court. However, just 1 day later, at Yuki Endo's own request, the lawyer withdrew the appeal. The media reported on Yuki Endo's death sentence. Only his mother was in extreme pain. This was the first time in Japanese judicial history that a special minor had been sentenced to death, so it attracted much attention. Everyone sympathized with the two sisters, Keiko and Riko, who lost their parents in just one night. They also lamented that the theft by Yuki Endo's father, when he was young, had left a lifelong shadow on him. Most of the public believed that the death sentence was deserved as it was the best possible consolation for the victims.